As a mangaka at Type Moon. By X Elenia Chapter 1-20. Kurokawa Kazuya let out a sigh of relief as he looked at the completed manga manuscript for the second part of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure in front of him. The first part of the manga was Jojo, and I couldn't be luckier. Kurokawa Kazuya whispered. Kurokawa Kazuya's original identity was no longer important, but in any case, he was a traveler who had turned 18 this year. He had dropped out of school, not by choice, but because his original self had dropped out several years before he arrived in this world. He had been living off a huge inheritance left by his parents, occasionally going out to work to secure his future. The reason for dropping out was purely due to his lack of academic prowess, nothing worth mentioning. He had the classic protagonist setup of being an orphan with a car, a house, and a little sister. A traveler, without parents, and with a little sister, except for not having a tragic backstory. Wasn't this the standard protagonist setup? In reality, he felt that the reason he had been given this identity was because it would have been troublesome to include his parents' background in the story, so the person responsible for sending him here had arranged this identity for him. The reason for having a little sister was probably because it's better to have someone to interact with rather than being alone, and compared to having a younger or older brother, having a sister was more preferable. The former might raise questions about his sexual orientation, and the latter would just make him a shut-in. There were no particularly significant people around him, so there was no need for special explanations. After arriving in this world, he acquired a mangaka system. After completing a manga, there was a chance to gain the abilities of a character from within the manga. Or at least that's how it appeared, as he had only completed his first manga and was still in the middle of serialization, so the details were unclear. And then the first manga he obtained was Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, parts 1-8, the entire first 7 parts and part of the 8th part. As his favorite manga from his previous life, there was no comparison. To obtain this manga from the very beginning, he felt incredibly lucky. He even thought that even if the system hadn't given him this manga, he would one day draw this epic celebration of humanity with his own pen. And now, he had it right from the start. Could there be anything luckier than this? The current year was 1984, 1 year had passed since he arrived in this world, and he had become a somewhat recognized mangaka. He initially gained recognition with a short manga called Rohan Kishibe Does Not Move, under his real name, Kurokawa Kazuya, which was a runner-up for the 1983 Tezuka Award. Although it wasn't selected as the winner, it was considered a decent work among the 5 selected at the time. Soon after, his Jojo's Bizarre Adventure obtained the official serialization qualification and began serializing in Jump. Though there were some twists along the way, the editorial team strongly disapproved of featuring a foreigner as the main character. They eventually accepted it. Well, it's all thanks to Jojo's Bizarre Adventure being the first manga I drew. Since he initially drew Rohan Kishibe Does Not Move, which was essentially a spin-off of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, featuring its characters, even though it was a short piece, he still managed to complete a manga. He quickly gained the abilities of characters from that manga. He hadn't gained any combat abilities like stands, just the manga abilities. At the moment, he didn't possess any special powers. But he had the manga drawing ability of Rohan Kishibe. He had seen how challenging creating manga was from watching Bakuman in his previous life, especially observing the live drawing sessions of someone named Yusuke Murata for One Punch Man. He knew it could be demanding, and even if he could see the progress ahead of time, it was clear that being a mangaka was tough. Yusuke Murata's manga drawing live sessions often ended up with him unexpectedly falling asleep. It was obvious that he was overworked. The same happened when he drew Rohan Kishibe Does Not Move, especially since he was a complete beginner at the time. It took him over a month to complete that short piece. During the process, he only slept for about 5 to 6 hours a day, spending the rest of his time revising and editing. After finishing one draft, he would redraw it from memory, but it was still filled with mistakes. He couldn't even complete one draft in a day, and he got so frustrated that he threw his pen a few times. Despite all this, after he submitted it to Jump, it received praise for having a good story but rough artwork. It was a surprise to him that he even made it as a runner-up, as he had initially thought it would only be a decent work. However, everything changed dramatically after gaining the manga abilities of Rohan Kishibe. For those unfamiliar with Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, it was essential to mention that Rohan Kishibe had the incredible ability to turn a blank piece of paper into a finished manga manuscript in just 10 minutes, without the need for assistance. What he produced wasn't a rough draft but a complete manuscript. The entire process took just 10 minutes. In other words, as long as he had the inspiration and the composition ready in his mind, he could easily complete 6 manuscript pages in 1 hour of uninterrupted work. Absolutely superhuman. And now he possessed this superhuman skill. This was why, while Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Phantom Blood, was still ongoing, he had already finished illustrating the battle trend of the second part. This ability was truly fantastic. Incredibly fantastic. Every time Kurokawa Kazuya thought back to the hellish beginning when he first started drawing manga, he felt like he was in heaven now. Succeeding on the first try was fantastic, gaining this ability was fantastic. He sincerely appreciated it. Well, what should I draw next? Should I finish Jojo first, or should I create an original manga? Kurokawa Kazuya pondered when he was bored. Anyway, since he could complete a manuscript in 10 minutes, creating an original work might be more challenging because he'd have to think about composition and plot. But with Jojo, he already had the entire story in his mind, so drawing it would be faster. Now, let's talk about the current situation in this world. As far as he knew, this world didn't have any anomalies or superpowers. At least, he hadn't found any so far. Although he now lived in a place called Morio Town, and there were cities like Fuyuki City and Mifune City on the map, as well as places like Matakahara, this was still a peaceful world. Because he had visited Fuyuki City and Mifune City. He had visited the Tasaka family, and they didn't seem like a family of magicians at all. He had seen Tasaka Rin, who was over a year old, and Tasaka Sakura, who was only a few months old. Both were cute. Tasaka Tokiomi had even given him a taste of the noble lifestyle. It seemed like a good setting for creating stories. He had also visited Ryugi family, where he had seen Shiki Ryugi, who was 4 or 5 years old. They appeared to be a family of ancient warriors but were surprisingly hospitable. He mentioned that he was a mangaka gathering material, and they didn't chase him away or ignore him because he wasn't famous. Overall, it felt good. Though he hadn't investigated Morio Town or Matakihara due to the time difference, he was well aware of an incident that occurred in Morio Town in 1983 from the entirety of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. That incident was the murder of Rimi Sugimoto by Yoshikage Kira. He had indeed found the Sugimoto family, and as of 1984, they were still living well. As for the certain street of no return in Morio Town, he had found it too. It wasn't on the map, but it was just like that. The intersection was cluttered with too many things, not very conspicuous, and had a small entrance, which was probably why it wasn't on the map, or maybe it was intentionally left out. He didn't lure anyone or try it himself. After all, it was better not to commit murder. If he tried it himself, and it turned out that the street really couldn't be turned back, he would be in deep trouble. So, he often observed it from a distance. Once, when he passed by naturally, he didn't look back, but a person beside him turned back casually because someone had called them from behind. And nothing happened. That person didn't die at all, they were still alive. After that, he was quite certain that nothing would happen in this world. This world was just an ordinary, everyday world. He began to firmly believe this. By the way, Ilia's birth date is earlier than Shuru Emiya's, and Shuru Emiya and Rin Tasaka were born around the same time, probably in 1982. So, was Iliya born in 1981 or 1980? He couldn't remember these details. He knew Rin Tasaka's birthday because it was casually mentioned when he asked about her cute daughter. Tasaka Tokiomi had told him that. As for the system and whether he was someone's pawn, he had thought about it. However, he couldn't find answers to these questions, and at this point, it didn't matter. Even if he was a pawn in someone else's game, what did it matter? He was living better than before, with no one restricting him. In the future, he might even live longer thanks to his abilities. If being a pawn meant being treated like this, then please, by all means, keep him as a pawn. Anyway, let's go gather some material. As for everything above, you can take it as setting the premise for this novel, or you can see it as my delusions and a summary of the past year. Currently, besides having the ability to draw manga quickly, I'm just a completely ordinary person with no combat abilities. Well, if I had to count, does throwing a pen count? I'm quite good at throwing it accurately within about 5 meters. In any case, this is my current situation, and I am the protagonist of this novel, Kurokawa Kazuya. I look forward to our time together in the future. Ring, ring. Kazuya reached out and turned off the alarm clock beside him with a click. My head hurts a bit. Rubbing his head, Kazuya slowly sat up in bed. He wanted to create his own manga, but he always found himself constrained. Every time he tried to come up with ideas, he realized that the novels and anime he had seen in his previous life on Earth contained elements similar to what he was thinking. Is it impossible to completely break free from the past? After all, human imagination is based on their own experiences. For instance, can God create a stone so heavy that even he can't lift it? That's an unanswerable question for humans, but what about beings beyond humanity, like the real God? Kazuya wanted to try adapting a game he had played in the past into a manga. The game was about 100 people stranded on an island, with only one survivor in the end. However, it was just a dream, he couldn't involve others or bring elements from his dreams into reality. But knowledge from his dreams could be retained. Time for breakfast, I guess. Kazuya wasn't particularly skilled at cooking, but it was just him and his little sister at home. He didn't trust her to eat outside when she went to school in the mornings. So, over the past year, he had been learning to cook and had some experience from his previous life. Now his sister no longer complained about the food being bad. After preparing breakfast and warming up 2 cups of milk, Kazuya headed to his sister's room and knocked on the door. "Kazumi, it's time for school. Breakfast is ready, please get up." There was no response from inside the room. Kazuya let out a sigh and pushed the door open. He saw his little sister, Kurokawa Kazumi, still sound asleep. "Time to wake up, Kazumi. You'll be late for school." Ah. Kazumi slowly opened her eyes, squinting against the bright sunlight streaming into the room. Kazuya drew back the curtains. "Good morning, Kazumi." "Oh, Oni-chan." Kazumi, still half asleep, rubbed her eyes. "What time is it?" "It's 7:30. If you don't want to be late, you have about 35 minutes left," Kazuya said, glancing at the clock. Kazumi pouted and went back to lie down. "Let me sleep for 15 more minutes." "Kazumi. Kazumi." These shouts came from outside. "It looks like you can't sleep anymore," Kazuya said to his younger sister. "Your classmates are here to see you. Hurry up and get up. Don't make your friends wait too long." "Yeah, I know," Kazumi reluctantly sighed and sat up. "Well then, I'll go and see your friends first. Get up quickly." "Okay." With that, Kazuya left the room and opened the door. "Oni-san, hello." "Yeah." Kazuya nodded at the 2 girls in front of him, who were about the same age as his sister. "Kazumi just woke up, and there's still some time before school, so come on in." "Thank you, Oni-san." Thank you." Kazuya smiled and didn't say much. The cheerful girl was named Chitanda Yoko, while the slightly nervous one was named Kawamoto Hanako. Both were his sister's classmates. As for Kazumi, she was now a first-year junior high school student, 13 years old this year. "I won't have breakfast, I'll just go." "No, you can't." Kazuya stopped Kazumi, who had rushed downstairs, and said, "You must have breakfast." "Ah." Kazumi pouted and reluctantly agreed, okay, I know. "And you must finish all your milk." "Okay." After a somewhat hurried breakfast, Kazumi greeted her brother and walked to school with her classmates. It took about 10 minutes to walk from here to her school. And then, she didn't notice that her brother, Kazuya, had quietly followed them. He continued to watch until he was certain that his sister had entered the school grounds, and then he turned back. He didn't need to follow too closely. He had a special sense that allowed him to gauge his sister's approximate location. However, it seemed his sister couldn't sense him. Time to start work. Kazuya tidied up his room and then entered his workspace. Last night, he had entered that dream world as usual to observe people's expressions. He felt that he should be able to finish the first chapter of his manga today. Kazuya took out the new manga manuscript, which he had already prepared, and set it aside. Initially, he had to create rough drafts, but now he didn't need to. He could begin working directly on the original manuscript. With no room for error, he worked at an incredibly fast pace. In his manga, there was a scene where, despite his incredible speed, he had taken several days to draw it. It depicted the various expressions of people on an airplane after they learned what was about to happen. Based on his dream, he could remember 2 faces a day. Now, after completing the final face, the image before him didn't look like a manga. It looked like a photograph. It was a photo capturing the faces of all the people he had documented. Ringing. The phone? Probably from the editorial department. Kazuya glanced at the phone. He knew that only people from the editorial department called on this phone. He used a different phone for other purposes. Hello, is this Kurokawa? Yes, it's me. Is that Uemoto-san? Yes, your manuscript for the current chapter is already complete. Is the next one ready? Kazuya's editor, Yu Uemoto, sounded somewhat puzzled. It was unusual for someone who insisted on not having an assistant to finish a manga chapter by themselves. He found it strange. Oh, it's all ready. I can send it to you if you want. No need for that. I'll come over. I also want to discuss the content of the manga with you. Is that all right? Sure. Kazuya nodded. I'll be waiting at home. After hanging up the phone, Kazuya took out the manuscript for the second half of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Phantom Blood, which he had already prepared, and set it aside. He then resumed work on his new original manga. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Not long ago, Kazuya had just finished drawing Jojo, Part 3, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders. For most mangaka, the requirements of working tirelessly and staying up late didn't apply to him at all. After all, he could complete 1 page of original manuscript in an average of 10 minutes. Moreover, completing this part of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure meant that he had no financial worries for the future. In his previous life, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, serialized by Hirohiko Araki in 1987 and still ongoing when he crossed over in 2017, was an immensely influential manga. Even before his arrival, it had already become the 12th manga in Japan to sell over 1 billion copies. Just this one manga was enough for him to live a comfortable life. He might even follow in the footsteps of Hirohiko Araki, who was the only mangaka from Japan to have a solo exhibition at the Louvre, and collaborate with popular clothing brands. Of course, these accomplishments could be attributed to Araki's exceptional social skills. Nevertheless, it clearly demonstrated the manga's power. Unlike the future, where some readers might find the art style uncomfortable or unappealing, everyone here was accustomed to it. This was the norm in this world. Although serialization of his manga was not entirely smooth, it passed the editorial meetings and began serialization. However, the situation was far from ideal. At best, it managed to avoid cancellation, with occasional minor bursts of popularity. Ding dong. The doorbell rang, and Kazuya put down his pen, went to the door, and glanced to confirm the visitor. He then opened the door. Hello, Iwamoto-san. It's been a while, Kurokawa. Iwamoto Yu, the editor, said somewhat helplessly. He didn't like visiting authors, but perhaps he had confidence in this case. After all, Kurokawa Kazuya had started with short stories and had progressed significantly since then. He couldn't just leave him be. Yes, Iwamoto-san. Kazuya nodded. Iwamoto Yu, at 36 years old, was his editor. I apologize for making you come to pick up the manuscript in person. No, it's fine. You must be working hard under a lot of pressure, Iwamoto Yu said with a sigh of understanding. The latest chapter was ranked 12th, and a slight misstep could bring it dangerously close to cancellation. Not exactly. Kazuya's mouth twitched slightly. After all, the manga he drew was meticulous and enough to sustain years of serialization, especially in this world with time acceleration, which allowed him to meet deadlines without difficulty. With the experiences from his previous life, he had no shortage of stories to tell. His manga skills were now at a superhuman level. The only time he felt tired was when he thought about his original manga. The rest of the time was quite easy. He was aware of the current 12th place ranking, but he didn't care. The art style of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, in its early parts, wasn't very refined. Now, with his superlative drawing skills, he was making rapid progress. Currently, His work had seen significant improvements compared to the ongoing part of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. He had even redrawn the entire second half of Part 1. Coupled with the next chapter featuring Dio Brando's transformation into a vampire, his artistry had taken a significant leap. He expected the ranking to improve, moving away from the danger zone. "How has your recent work been? Let me take a look." Iwamoto Yu looked at the person in front of him and asked. Kazuya, as tall as the Jojo characters in his manga at 195 centimeters, appeared robust and nothing like the typical height of a Japanese person. He didn't look like a mangaka at all. If someone said he was a boxer or a character from those muscular manga nowadays, people might even believe it. "Follow me." Kazuya nodded and led Iwamoto Yu to his workspace. "Would you like something to drink?" When they arrived, Kazuya asked him to sit for a moment. Then I won't hold back. Do you have coffee?" "Yes, please wait a moment." Iwamoto Yu smiled and looked around, then noticed the manga on the table. What's this?" Iwamoto Yu walked over and flipped through it. "Amazing artwork. There's a huge improvement compared to what's being drawn now. But this isn't Jojo, is it?" "Iwamoto-san, here's your coffee." Kazuya placed the coffee in front of Iwamoto Yu. "Thank you." Iwamoto Yu nodded and then frowned. "This isn't Jojo, right?" "Ah, you're right," Kazuya nodded. "This is a new manga I've been conceptualizing recently." "Are you planning to conclude your current manga?" Iwamoto Yu said, somewhat surprised. Although the current situation of Jojo is difficult to describe as great, it's not at a point where it must end. It would be a shame to do so, wouldn't it? No, it's not about ending it." Kazuya hesitated for a moment. "It seems like you've misunderstood." As he spoke, Kazuya took out a package from a nearby shelf, labeled Phantom Blood. "This goes all the way to the end of Part 1. Part 1? Iwamoto Yu was momentarily surprised, then sighed as he took it. "It's quite heavy. Looks like there's a lot of pages." Then, he opened the package and took out a thick stack of original manuscripts. His expression went from calm at the beginning to shocked. "This artwork, a tremendous improvement. It's possible. With this kind of progress, the rankings this time will definitely rise." He glanced at it slightly. "This must be hundreds of pages." "You got an assistant?" Iwamoto Yu said with a hint of oddity. "No, not an assistant. I drew all of it myself." Iwamoto Yu was taken aback, clearly not believing it. At the beginning, when Kazuya declined his offer to help find an assistant, he suspected that perhaps he knew someone in this field. Now, it seemed very likely. The original manuscript for this manga. Compared to the initial, Rohan Kishibe does not move, and the subsequent currently serialized, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, the progress in the serialized parts is immense, as if it's drawn by two different people. Without a careful look at the story, it's hard to tell, but the artwork has improved significantly. At the start, Rohan Kishibe does not move, was at a beginner's level. Later on, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure already showed a massive improvement. Now, there's another significant leap forward compared to the currently serialized parts. No assistant. Who would believe that? I remember it was serialized before, Iwamoto Yu said with some confusion as he looked at the first few pages. That's because I felt the previous drawings weren't that good. So, during this time, I redrew these pages, hoping to use them when the tankobon is released. I see, assistants, Iwamoto Yu thought to himself. It's very likely that he has more than one assistant to be able to continue serialization and even redraw the previous chapters. Who would believe there are no assistants involved? In reality, there were indeed no assistants. Kazuya, with Rohan Kishibe's abilities, had continuously improved his drawing skills as he worked on his manga. By now, he felt that he had made significant progress compared to the early parts of the ongoing Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. As a result, he had chosen to redraw everything, especially since the current storyline was approaching its first climax. "How does it feel?" Kazuya asked when they had almost reached the last page of the manga. Iwamoto Yu's expression wasn't very pleased as he commented, "The protagonist just died." "Yes, that's right," Kazuya nodded. The story is good, and the artwork is excellent, but the death of the protagonist is a bit hard to accept. If you plan to end it like this, it's one thing, but according to what you said, this is only the first part, right?" Iwamoto Yu said in confusion. From a reader's perspective, it was indeed a good manga, but he thought this was the first part. Did that mean there was a second part where the protagonist would be resurrected? No, that's not the case. The main character changes, and the second part features the grandson of the first part's main character. Anyway, I've already finished drawing the first 3 parts. Let me show you, Kazuya explained and began searching for the completed manuscripts on the nearby shelf. Upon hearing this, Iwamoto furrowed his brow. He wasn't pleased with Kurokawa Kazuya's attitude. He thought Kurokawa Kazuya was overly confident. Yes, it was arrogance. He hadn't even asked for his editor's opinion before hastily drawing so much. Well, it wasn't right to say that. In such a short time, it was generally impossible to complete so much work. How many assistants did he have, if any? Furthermore, could he afford to hire so many assistants? Even if they were ghostwriters, did he have the money for it? Although this room was nice, it didn't scream wealth. It was impossible to tell if he was exceptionally rich. But if he wasn't using ghostwriters or many assistants, it didn't make sense. Did he really have that much money? All right, here they are, Kazuya said, taking out the 2 large stacks of manuscript pages from the folder and placing them on the table. Iwamoto's mouth twitched, further confirming his suspicions. This quantity. It must be over 1,000 pages, right? Even if he calculated it as drawing 4 to 5 pages a day without a break, it would still take over a year. No, given this thickness, it might be over 2,000 pages. Even with that calculation, he could work continuously for over 2 years. If he serialized it, he could continue for several years. He opened the package and didn't look at the content but instead examined the artwork briefly. It was all extremely well drawn, as though someone had spent decades immersed in the world of manga, far superior to the earlier works. Were these his pre-existing drafts? Did he accumulate this much material over 2 years before submitting it? But that didn't make sense. If he had drafts from the start, why were the initial submissions so rough? While they were still good, they couldn't compare to these recent works. It just didn't add up. He couldn't wrap his head around it. In his 3 years as an editor, this was the first time he had encountered such a situation. Perhaps you didn't consider one thing. My drawing speed, Kazuya said, picking up a pen from the side. Iwamoto was puzzled. What do you mean? As he observed this young man who seemed to have figured something out, Iwamoto felt uncertain. Drawing speed? Was this a joke? Well, this manga's first chapter has only 3 pages left, so if you have some time, you can sit here for half an hour. Half an hour should be enough. Huh? Iwamoto looked at the manga manuscript pages on the table. There were 3 of them in total. He had examined them earlier and felt that the story was impressive, giving him an unusual sense of reality. However, the first chapter wasn't even complete yet, and he couldn't grasp the specifics. 30 minutes for 3 pages. Are you saying that you can finish 3 original manuscript pages in 30 minutes? Iwamoto was incredulous. No, it's impossible, right? Did I hear you wrong? Completing 3 original manuscript pages in just 30 minutes, even top mangaka can't do that, let alone original manuscripts. What are you thinking? This is impossible. Scribble, 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 scribble. Right as Kazuya contemplated for a few seconds with a pen in hand, he began drawing at an incredibly fast pace without hesitation. You don't even do rough drafts? No, this can't be, such a complex composition, and you're not planning to do a rough draft. And what's the quality of this? It's so fast. You've already drawn the backgrounds. Is this for real? No rough draft? Iwamoto watched, his forehead covered in sweat. Kazuya briefly paused, then lightly flicked the pen in his hand. Is this something a human can do? I couldn't see it clearly earlier, but what is this? Are you kidding me? Is this shading? You're applying ink directly, and it's landing exactly where it should without any errors. Is this really shading? He felt like his understanding of the world had been shattered that day. Handwork that should have been done carefully with a pen was being done so absurdly fast by Kurokawa Kazuya. Is the shading done? Iwamoto looked at his watch. 27 minutes. Is that so? 3 minutes faster than I expected. Kazuya commented. He had initially thought that drawing an original manga would be slower, but perhaps he had grown accustomed to it. Are you really human? Iwamoto said in disbelief. With this speed, It explained why there were so many original manuscripts. While others toiled and couldn't finish 6 original manuscripts even working 20 hours a day with assistance, Kurokawa Kazuya managed to complete them in just 1 hour. It was several times faster than ordinary people, beyond comprehension. Hee. Iwamoto Yu began to chuckle slowly. What's wrong? No. Nothing, I'm just delighted. Iwamoto Yu took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, and continued, it's amazing, no, it's too amazing. Leaving the story aside, just the drawing speed, the craftsmanship, that alone is incredible. Are you saying you don't like the story? Well, no, not at all. Iwamoto Yu quickly waved his hand to deny, I just haven't had the chance to look at the story. Who has the time to read the story when I'm so blown away by your artwork? He had initially thought of Kurokawa Kazuya as a promising newcomer, but after witnessing his incredible drawing speed, his perspective had changed drastically. Kurokawa Kazuya was not just a newcomer, he was a manga industry phenomenon, surpassing everyone's expectations. Receiving the Tezuka Award on his first submission, and subsequently gaining a serialization offer on his second, he already considered that to be extraordinary. Very few people had achieved such success since the establishment of Jump. When Kurokawa Kazuya mentioned not needing any assistance, it had taken him by surprise. He had thought that was the limit, but it seemed there was room for even more improvement. No, this was beyond superlative. It was indescribable. The term, genius, couldn't do justice to this man. Iwamoto struggled to find the right words to describe him. With someone like this, becoming a team leader or a chief editor in the future was not an impossible feat. He felt like he had discovered a goldmine. He had initially considered replacing Kurokawa Kazuya as his editor due to his incooperative nature, but now, there was no way he would do that. Could I take a look at this manga now, Kurokawa-sensei? Iwamoto Yu asked, referring to the manga he had brought with him, the second and third parts of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Sensei? Kazuya fell silent for a moment. The form of address had changed, but he let it slide. Sure, go ahead. Thank you very much. Iwamoto began flipping through the manga pages. And then, the captivating plot drew him in. Even though he had been an editor for 3 years and had seen a wide variety of manga, he felt like he was immersed in a strange and fascinating world. The first part introduced ripple energy and vampires, while the second featured stand users and ultimate life beings. Iwamoto couldn't help but be captivated by it all. I'm back, Kazuya, listening to the sounds outside, put down his pen and checked the time. It was already 3:30 in the afternoon. Iwamoto-san, my sister is back. Are you planning to have dinner here tonight? No, it's okay. Iwamoto Yu shook his head, smiled, and said, I'll be leaving in a bit, Kurokawa-sensei. Can I come back tomorrow? Looking at the stack of manga manuscripts on the side, which was several times thicker than what he was currently reading, he expressed some anticipation. That was for the third part. He hadn't finished reading the second part yet, but he was already looking forward to the manuscript for the third part. Ah, of course. Iwamoto Yu nodded, then please take care of your sister, and I'll finish up here shortly. I'll leave when I'm done. Alright. Kazuya thought for a moment and nodded. By the way, when the tankobon for this manga is released, I'd like to replace the first half of the first part with the part I'm currently redrawing. Sure, that should be much better than the previous content, and I don't think the editor will object. After saying this, Iwamoto Yu watched Kurokawa Kazuya, who had left, and focused his attention on the manga. Now, this was the most exciting part, where the protagonist confronted the ultimate life being, cars. With such an invincible existence, how would the main character respond? Is that Kurokawa-sensei? Iwamoto Yu answered the phone. Yes, it's me. What's up? Did I disturb you? No, I have some free time. Alright, the results for the award are out this time, Iwamoto Yu said, listening to the silence on the other end of the line. This time, you've secured third place. I see, I understand. Thanks. Is there anything else? Kazuya sighed with relief. It seemed that his improved artwork had also made the manga stronger. He had gone from 12th place to 3rd place in a single jump. Of course, there were significant plot factors at play. Even if his art hadn't improved, he felt confident that he would have ranked around 6th or 7th now. Actually, there is something else. It's about the New Year's gathering. Will you be attending this year? The New Year's gathering. Kazuya hesitated. He knew about it from watching the anime, Bakuman. He remembered that if Mangaka didn't attend, the editorial department would come up with humiliating activities as punishment for the editors. Activities like shame play.
Yes, that's right. Will you have time to attend, Kurokawa-sensei?
Let me think about it.
I'll get back to you with an answer by tomorrow, Kazuya replied. He wasn't particularly inclined to attend, but the thought of editors being punished for his absence bothered him. On the other hand, the idea of seeing what kind of bizarre punishment they would come up with was oddly intriguing.
All right, I understand, Iwamoto Yu said, relieved. If you can, please consider attending. It wouldn't be great for the editors if you don't. But, looking forward to the punishment they'll come up with, Kazuya muttered to himself. What's wrong? Your tone has changed since the last time you went to Kurokawa's house to pick up the manuscript, one of the editors nearby said, looking puzzled. I'm just showing the respect that someone who deserves it should receive, Iwamoto Yu said. He'll become a super popular mangaka one day. I have that feeling. He hoped Kurokawa Kazuya would attend the gathering. With his speed in drawing, there was no excuse of not having time. Besides, the content he had already drawn for Jojo's Bizarre Adventure was enough for several years of serialization. This manga was so outstanding that it was bound to avoid cancellation.
There was no way he didn't have the time, but, if he didn't attend, he couldn't help but think about the punishment that would befall the editors who were left out. It made him feel uneasy. However, there are so many amazing manga in these issues. Yeah, and Akira Toriyama-sensei's new work, Dragon Ball, seems promising.
Iwamoto, come over here, the chief editor called Iwamoto over.
Yes, sir. Iwamoto got up and walked over. The chief editor looked at Iwamoto Yu and placed the manuscript for the second half of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure that he had brought over on the table. He said, take it back and have him redraw it.
Iwamoto Yu was momentarily stunned. You do know, right? The death of the protagonist is a massive blow to the manga. Does he want to end it here? The chief editor furrowed his brow, remembering that he had gone through the entire stack of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure that Kurokawa Kazuya had submitted yesterday. He was genuinely amazed at the situation between the protagonist, Jojo, and the antagonist, Dio. Such a manga he had never seen before, but the protagonist had died. It was unnecessary, yet it happened. It was a rather ill-advised move. Well, it's probably impossible to change the fact that the protagonist died. Iwamoto Yu sighed. According to what Kurokawa-sensei said, he plans to introduce a new protagonist in each part, and he's already drawn up to part 3. I can guarantee you that it's going to be a very exciting story. Iwamoto Yu hoped that this manga would continue to be serialized as it was, or it would be a great loss, especially part 3. The introduction of stand abilities, various stands, and exotic settings from around the world. The concept of a villain as a savior. Vividly distinctive characters. Quirky but refreshing dialogue. Bizarre and increasingly sensational poses. All of these immersed him deeply in the manga after he finished reading it. He felt like he was afflicted with a disease where he couldn't bear not to read Jojo. One protagonist per part. The chief editor fell into a slight silence. Do you know where Kurokawa Kazuya lives? Yes, I do. Call him now and arrange for the two of us to visit him.
Yes. Iwamoto Yu nodded. Buzz. Inside the plane. 100 passengers sat together, each with a parachute beside them.
Their faces displayed various expressions. Kazuya were no exception. Although Kazuya knew that even if he died here, he would simply wake up later, he still tried to make his face show a hint of fear. Because there was one time when his expression was too composed, and he received special attention. Hurry up and jump. Anyone who doesn't jump before we reach the final destination will be thrown out, and those who resist will be shot. Speed, speed. The organizers shouted loudly at the front of the plane. In the middle of the plane was the platform where the organizers stood, surrounded by a railing. In addition to the organizers in the back, there were several armed people holding guns. Behind them were the seats, and further back was the open area for parachuting. With the first person jumping, others began to gather their courage and jump one by one. Kazuya continued to observe a full-bodied woman who had caught his attention. He watched as she trembled but summoned the courage to walk to the parachute spot. The woman reached the parachute spot, her face filled with fear. Occasionally, she looked back at the guns that told her there was no turning back.
Oh, God. Reaching the edge of the plane, she hadn't made up her mind yet. When she saw the height below, her legs went weak, and she fell off, directly. Kazuya took a deep breath and followed. This time, his goal was simple. Keep an eye on this woman. Watch every choice she made, every decision, her expressions, and her final moments of death. Yes, he would spend a lot of time observing everyone on this plane. Watching every choice they made, and he drawing them. Before this woman, he had watched 19 other people. She was the 20th.
The first time, he didn't know anything and thought that dying here meant real death. He struggled desperately.
Then, the second time, he figured out the situation. From the third to the fifth time, he was always the last to jump and observed everyone's expressions. Starting from the sixth time, he specifically focused on one person and followed them closely.
During this process, he encountered situations where the person he was observing hadn't died yet but he had died. Or the person he was observing noticed he had to interact or even kill that person, which was of no benefit to his observational concept.
He was observing the appearance and expressions of every person, drawing them as characters for his first original manga. And, after so many times, he had made significant progress.
At least with parachuting. At first, he was scared out of his mind, but now he was used to it. And as for firearms and vehicles, as well as ways to hide himself.
Compared to the first-timers, he had grown a lot.
Sometimes, when he was tired of observing and didn't want to focus, he treated it as a game and killed everyone to become the first. After all, it was just a dream, and he had seen these people how many times already. Even if he killed them, they would reappear the next night when he went to sleep. As for what would happen after becoming the first, initially, the setting was that a plane would come to pick him up after becoming the first. But later, he found this setting uninteresting and wanted to change it. So, for now, he hadn't decided. After becoming the first, he would wake up. He hoped to come up with a more impactful ending. Although he had some ideas at the moment, he wasn't mature yet. This manga wasn't intended for a long serialization. A few dozen chapters to serve as his first practice work would suffice. It was different from Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. In Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, all the compositions had templates to refer to, which were the original manga and even the anime. But this manga was different. There were no clear compositions to refer to. The only reference was the false reality created by this dream. But turning three-dimensional into two-dimensional was still challenging, and how to make the visuals more dynamic was also a challenge. For the first chapter alone, he had already redrawn it 6 or 7 times. As for the second chapter, he didn't plan to start drawing until he had decided who the protagonist would be. Thud. He released his parachutes, roughly judged the direction in which the woman had landed just now, and hurried over. First, let's find a pair of binoculars as a makeshift telescope. Observing will be much easier with it. Life didn't matter, as he wouldn't die anyway. After all, this was just a dream. I'm back, Oni-chan. Kazumi pushed the door open and shouted. Oh, perfect, lunch is ready, let's eat together. Kazuya looked at his sister walking in and said. Yes, brother, what did you make? Omelette rice, Kazuya smiled. Come, taste it, and see if there's any improvement. Wash your hands first. Yes, Kazumi nodded, washed her hands, and sat in her usual spot. I'm starting. Kazumi, do you have plans for tomorrow? I haven't decided yet. Kazumi thought for a moment and, with a spoonful of omelette rice in her mouth, murmured, Oni-chan seems to have something going on. Kazumi is probably staying at home. Is that so? Kazuya nodded. If you have nothing planned, let's go to the amusement park tomorrow. Huh, really? Kazumi said excitedly. Yes, of course, I can't leave you idle at home. Kazuya stood up and pinched Kazumi's nose. Don't pinch my nose, Kazumi said, laughing. Nay, how about playing Hanafuda later? Ah, sure. Ring ring ring. Just then, the phone rang. Kazuya furrowed his brow. Who could be calling at this time? Kazumi, you go ahead and eat, I'll answer the phone. Yes. Oh, by the way, Kazuya turned back just a few steps away. How was it this time compared to last time? Kazumi thought hard and sighed. I can't tell. Is that so? Well, yeah, you always eat what I cook,
So unless there's a significant improvement, it's hard to tell, Kazuya nodded. I'll answer the call now.
Okay, go ahead. Kazuya smiled. It seemed like he needed to draw a food-themed world in the future and see if he could learn something. ... No one's there. Iwamoto Yu furrowed his brow as he looked at the phone. There had been no response up to this point.
Hello, is this the editorial department? After going upstairs, Kazuya saw the ringing phone in the room and knew who was calling. After all, only the people from the editorial department knew about the phone in the study. Yes, that's right, it's me, Iwamoto Yu. Iwamoto Yu breathed a sigh of relief as someone finally answered. Is there something you need? Kazuya was somewhat puzzled. The manuscript should have already been delivered. Yes, well, Kurokawa-sensei, the chief editor would like to visit you in a while. Do you have time? No, I don't have time, Kazuya directly refused. If you have time, that would be good. I said I don't have time.
Then, do you have something to do? Iwamoto Yu said in confusion. According to Kurokawa-sensei, there shouldn't be any work right now. Was he working on a new manga? The chief editor, standing nearby, also furrowed his brow. He was now quite interested in this mangaka who had refused an assistant and had also killed off the main character. And now, he was adding another item to the list, refusing the chief editor's visit. I'm going to play Hanafuda with my sister later, Kazuya said seriously. But, this matter shouldn't be that important, right? Compared to that, the chief editor. No, my sister is more important. Well, the corner of Iwamoto Yu's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but think of a word that might not exist yet, sister complex. It's okay, if it's not today, maybe tomorrow, the chief editor interjected, unable to bear it. Iwamoto Yu nodded and continued talking on the phone. What about tomorrow? Do you have time? No. Not tomorrow either. Iwamoto Yu was taken aback. Yes, but, what do you have to do tomorrow? I'm taking my sister to the amusement park. Kazuya thought for a moment and decided to share. It wasn't something that needed to be kept secret. Well, but, okay. Hold on a moment. Iwamoto Yu covered the phone and spoke to the chief editor. Well, chief editor, considering the situation. Then the day after tomorrow. Iwamoto Yu was somewhat impressed. It had to be said that the person who became a chief editor had a different aura, very calm. Yes, let me check. Iwamoto Yu had only been to the Kurokawa-sensei residence twice, and before, it was Kurokawa-sensei who came over. He didn't know that this guy was actually such a sister complex, and to this extent. To refuse even the chief editor's invitation just to accompany his sister, it was truly impressive. So, the day after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, that should work, Kazuya said after some thought. His sister, Kazumi, would be going to school by then, so he didn't have to worry about such matters. Good. Iwamoto Yu breathed a sigh of relief. Then it's the day after tomorrow. I'll come over with the chief editor. Alright, I'll prepare some tea to welcome you both when the time comes, Kazuya said and hung up the phone after confirming that there were no other matters. In his previous life, he used to say things like, God owes me a sister. In this life, he finally had the opportunity. How could he not be a sister complex? Don't just talk the talk, take action. So, now, whenever his sister was at home, Kazuya absolutely wouldn't work, but instead would spend time with her and take her out to play, except for the initial adjustment period when he came here. Of course, for him, who had achieved a certain level of success, the situation had improved considerably. Now, his drawing speed allowed him to have a lot of free time, which he could use to accompany his sister and do other things. Are you done eating, Kazumi? No, not yet. Kazumi's voice sounded a bit flustered. Well, don't worry, take your time, I know. The time is confirmed. Iwamoto Yu wiped the non-existent sweat from his brow and said. Good, that's settled then. The chief editor nodded and walked towards his room. Get back to work. Yes, the chief editor didn't say much more, he went into his room. Although he was uncomfortable with Kurokawa Kazuya's request, he didn't pay too much attention to it. If what Iwamoto Yu said was true, then Kurokawa Kazuya was undoubtedly a genius. Geniuses could be tolerated, no matter what they did, as long as they didn't harm him and JUMP's interests. But the premise was that this guy was indeed a genius. It was understandable for a genius to have quirks. But For ordinary people, that was a different story.
Ordinary people should act like ordinary people. If, as Iwamoto Yu claimed, he was not a genius, then he wouldn't accommodate an ordinary person. Nightfall. Kazumi lay on her bed in her room, gazing at the ceiling, lost in thought.
Oni-chan had changed. She didn't know when it started, but he had become gentle.
Was it because of his new job? Before, he used to search everywhere for work, taking odd jobs. He had no time or energy to take care of himself. However, ever since he became a mangaka, he changed. Apart from the time she knew he spent drawing manga, she hardly saw him working anymore. Whenever she was at home, he wouldn't work. For example, this time, he even pushed back something that seemed like it was from his boss because he wanted to go out with her on Sunday.
She couldn't help but imagine the teacher's expression when he skipped school to play because she wanted to. It was frightening. Yes, when Kazuya went upstairs to answer the phone just now, she quietly followed him, and when he was about to hang up, she quietly went back downstairs. That's why she was so flustered when he asked her questions, and she quickly ate a few bites of rice, almost choking.
But even so, Oni-chan had still achieved success.
She had even overheard her classmates discussing Oni-chan and his manga in class.
In that Shonen Jump magazine, they had asked her if she was related to that mangaka.
After all, Kurokawa Kazuya and Kurokawa Kazumi had very similar names.
In the end, it was all because Oni-chan, that idiot, had used his real name. He could have used a pen name, but he chose not to. But it felt good. All these changes were because Oni-chan had become a mangaka. So, she had a dream too. She wanted to become a mangaka just like Oni-chan. It must be wonderful.
Is this the place? The chief editor looked at the house in front of him and asked. Yes, Iwamoto Yu nodded. I'll go ring the doorbell.
Okay. The chief editor nodded. Although what Iwamoto Yu said seemed unbelievable, like drawing up to the third part, even though the length was the same as the first part and it had been serialized continuously for over 2 years. If it were longer.
It was almost unimaginable. But, if this were true, the benefits were evident.
Once they confirmed the stability of the manga, they could decide whether to cut it off after it fell into a low period. If the later plot turned out to be interesting, they would know it was a pity to cut it off at this time and could wait and see. If the later plot continued to be terrible, they would not hesitate to cut it off. Moreover, this would make it easier to allocate front cover color pages. For veteran mangaka who already had a significant reputation, they might not need much promotion. But for new mangaka, front cover color pages in Shonen Jump were an important promotional opportunity. So, it was common for mangaka to speed up or slow down their plot development when they found out they were getting a front cover color page. This way, their front cover color page would coincide with a small or major climax. However, knowing the plot development in advance changed everything. They could reserve front cover color pages well in advance, using them when the manga reached a significant climax. This allowed for more efficient planning. Of course, for almost all mangaka, this was an impossible feat.
In fact, they didn't even have a week's worth of backlog. Originally, they didn't need the word, almost. But, because of the person they were about to visit, they had to add, almost. If what Iwamoto Yu said was true, then he was a person who defied common sense. The chief editor had great expectations, because he couldn't figure out what benefit Iwamoto Yu would gain from lying, and even on the way here, although he thought he had hidden it well, the chief editor could tell from his expression what he was thinking deep down. Let's wait, and you'll be surprised. The chief editor was almost certain that Iwamoto Yu must be thinking this. So, he could almost conclude that this was true. But almost, because for him, a person who had seen countless mangaka, it was still too bizarre. It was like a modern person going back to ancient times and telling people from that era that the world was round. While it was true, in that era, almost no one would accept it without being surprised. Yoshikawa-san, Iwamoto Yu stood in front of the half-open door and called out. The chief editor looked over and saw the young man standing behind the door, revealing half of his body. He must be Kurokawa Kazuya. The chief editor thought so and walked slowly towards him. Hello, nice to meet you. You must be Kurokawa-sensei. The chief editor extended his hand. Yes, Kazuya nodded and shook hands. Nice to meet you, chief editor. No need to be so formal.
I'm Yoshikawa Daishi. You can call me Yoshikawa or Daishi, whatever you prefer. Okay. Kazuya nodded. Then, Yoshikawa-san, nice to meet you. Shall we stand here? No, my apologies. Kazuya stepped aside and said, please come in. Let's discuss things in detail. Yoshikawa Daishi nodded and smiled. We came here mainly because of your manga. I see. Kazuya nodded. I heard that your manga has reached the point where it could be serialized for several years. Yoshikawa Daishi didn't mention anything about ending it. Every mangaka was full of confidence in their work. If possible, he didn't want to say anything that would dent their confidence.
For a mangaka, self-confidence was crucial. Believing that their manga was better than others was essential. So, before coming here, he had already made a judgment. If what Iwamoto Yu said was true, and if this, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, sequel was really that exciting, then he would show some favoritism towards Kazuya Kurokawa and his manga. As long as it didn't rank below 15th place for several consecutive issues and reach the point of mandatory cancellation, he would make an effort. Of course, the manga had already reached a length that could be serialized for several years, and it had to be genuinely exciting. That's right. Kazuya nodded. In that case, may I have a look? Yoshikawa Daishi asked, revealing his main reason for this visit. Of course, you can. Come, let's go upstairs. Kazuya pointed upstairs. Yoshikawa Daishi let out a slight sigh of relief. Now that they had agreed to the visit, he believed in this matter for the most part. The remaining doubts could only be resolved by seeing it with his own eyes. Excuse us. Excuse us. Yoshikawa Daishi and Iwamoto Yu changed into slippers and walked with Kazuya to his studio.
Here's some tea for you. Yes. Ah, thank you, Kurokawa-sensei, Iwamoto Yu thanked.
No need to thank me. I told you when you came over that you could have tea, Kazuya said as he placed another cup of tea in front of Yoshikawa Daishi. Please, help yourselves. Thank you, Yoshikawa Daishi said, taking a sip. This tea is excellent.
As long as you like it, Kazuya said, then walked over to the bookshelf in his studio and took out 2 stacks of bound books, placing them beside the 2 visitors. Is this the continuation of Jojo? Yoshikawa Daishi looked at the thick stack of books in front of him with some surprise. They were quite thick. These collected volumes alone could make up about 20 volumes if he were to publish them individually. But what about the content inside? Kurokawa-sensei, did you bind these yourself? Iwamoto Yu asked, puzzled.
Yes, that's right, Kazuya nodded. I figured that an editor might come to take a look, so I made a few copies and bound them myself. The original manuscripts are sealed and stored at home. I see, Iwamoto Yu sighed in relief. It would be disastrous if something happened to the original manuscripts.
Yes, indeed, Yoshikawa Daishi flipped through the books quickly, making sure there were no issues with the quality, or even if there were quality issues, he wouldn't be able to tell. Since you've drawn so much, it's inevitable that situations like this might arise, and it would be a disaster if the original manuscripts were lost. This is just right. Yoshikawa Daishi nodded. What's the order for reading these? Just start from the top, Kazuya said. I see. Yoshikawa Daishi picked up the top volume.
Well, I'll read through it again, Iwamoto Yu said. Even though I've already read it once, it feels like I'm addicted to it. I keep thinking about these scenes in my mind these days, haha. Oh, and the cover. Yoshikawa Daishi said with some surprise after flipping through the first few pages. After the first blank page, there was a powerful cover. Several characters were depicted on it, all of whom he had never seen before. Below them was the title of this part, Battle Tendency. He thought for a moment, and these characters above should be the characters from the second part, right? In the front, there were 2 men posing strangely, and there was a woman beside them. Yoshikawa Daishi thought that this might be the female protagonist of this part. As a chief editor, and wanting to provide feedback on this, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, he had naturally carefully read and appreciated all the content of the first volume of this manga. For the woman depicted on the cover of this new part, his first thought was the previous part's female protagonist, Irina, from Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Although she had few appearances and very limited lines, she had left a deep impression on him. The image of her washing her mouth with muddy water right after having her first kiss taken away was a testament to the mangaka's excellent imagination. Through just 1 or 2 pages of description, the personality of a woman had been perfectly portrayed. And behind these characters was a large moon, with 3 men posing strangely beneath it.
Battle tendency. Let me take a look. After reading the name of the manga once again, he opened this volume of the manga. And he became immersed in the world of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, once again. The novel phrases, unique poses, unusual character personalities, ripple, pillar men, and ultimate life being.
Even in the 21st century, these things that didn't seem outdated brought him endless surprises.
This was a quite dazzling manga. He quickly finished the manga for the second part, and his hand reached for the next volume. The tea on the side had been sitting there for quite some time, and he hadn't even had half a cup. He was too engrossed in reading to drink tea.
The new setting for the third part, the introduction of stand users, brought him another huge surprise. Various abilities in the manga made him see a different kind of vitality compared to other manga. The unique arrogance of the protagonist, Jotaro Kujo, had also left a deep impression on him. And there was the main antagonist from the previous part, Dio Brando, who appeared again in this part. After his appearance in this part, his mysterious and exceptional aura left a clear impression on even people outside the manga. His hand kept turning pages. Accompanied by the perspective of the protagonist team, they traveled from Japan to Hong Kong, Singapore, India, Pakistan, the Red Sea, and finally reached Dio's base in Egypt. The local customs along the way gave him a feeling that this is probably how it is in reality, even though he hadn't been to most of these places. And the battles in it were fantastic. The abilities of the characters in it were almost predetermined from their first appearance, and there were very few instances of characters suddenly becoming stronger. The battles in this manga often relied on intelligence and courage to defeat the opponent, rather than simply overpowering them. Even the protagonist from the second part once said, "The 2 words I hate most are effort and cheer." Such sentences, which are almost impossible to appear in a shonen manga, have made this person, who originally could use ripple to prevent aging, become an old man by the time he appeared in part 3. The sun in the sky had been rising continuously since they entered, and it was slowly beginning to set. He had now turned to the part of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure that came after the third part. The statement Enyaba made before dying, "Even villains have their saviors," filled him with anticipation once again. And then, the story of Darby the Gambler, which had no combat at all, made him feel like he was reading the most satisfying episode content he had ever read. And then, the plot quickly reached the later part, the battle with the final boss, Dio. The successive sacrifices of Abdul, Iggy, and Kakuin. Dio's portrayal was approaching perfection, with no whitewashing or any reasons given. He was a born villain, and his victory and domination were deeply ingrained in this character. Finally, the protagonist, Jotaro Kujo, who had realized time stop, defeated the last boss, Dio Brando, and indeed turned Dio's vampire body into ashes in the sunlight. This is an incredibly excellent manga. The chief editor couldn't help but praise. "How do you feel, Yoshikawa-san?" Iwamoto Yu asked the chief editor, Yoshikawa Daishi. It was already quite late, and he was feeling hungry. He had already read this manga once, but even so, he still found it incredibly enjoyable. It wasn't the kind of thing that you wouldn't want to read again. "It's good," Yoshikawa Daishi nodded. "This is probably the most entertaining manga I've ever read." Compared to Hokuto no Ken, Iwamoto Yu asked, referring to the highly popular manga, Hokuto no Ken, that was currently serialized in Jump. Well, the chief editor pondered for a moment and shook his head. "It's hard to compare, but if I had to vote, I'd choose Jojo." "Why?" Iwamoto Yu asked, excited. After all, this was his mangaka, and this choice would benefit him as well. "Because of personal preference and the number of manuscripts." Yoshikawa Daishi looked at the stack of manuscripts in front of him and smiled. "First, it's a matter of personal preference. Although Hokuto no Ken has been consistently ranked first for several issues now, it will probably continue for a while longer. But I feel that Jojo is more to my liking, and with so many manuscripts available, you know what comes next, right? When to give this manga the cover or color page privileges." Iwamoto Yu nodded, acknowledging the truth of that. With these manuscripts, they could easily plan when to feature the manga on the cover or provide color pages during editorial meetings.
Normally, most mangaka learned about their upcoming cover or color pages in advance and adjusted their story progress accordingly to coincide with a major or minor climax on that day. But that wasn't necessary in this case. With so many manuscripts at hand, planning was simplified.
Moreover, after reading the later chapters, Yoshikawa Daishi had a feeling that the popularity of this JoJo might remain moderate for the time being, but in the later parts.
After the introduction of stand abilities in Part 3, he felt that it would undoubtedly become a massive hit. It might even rank high, possibly even first, in Shonen Jump's rankings. There was more than just a possibility. He even had the urge to consider abandoning the current serialization and start on Part 3 right away. However, he quickly suppressed that impulse. He knew it wasn't a rational decision. As an editor-in-chief, he couldn't afford to make such impulsive choices.
By the way, where's Kurokawa-sensei? Yoshikawa Daishi looked around the room. Well, Iwamoto Yu glanced at the door and said, it seems like his sister is coming back from shul, so he's going to prepare dinner for today.
Is that so? The chief editor paused for a moment and then nodded. It made sense. With so much backlog, he could focus on anything.
Well, then let's head back for today, the chief editor stood up and said.
Huh? Going back now? Iwamoto Yu was taken aback. We've only just started looking at the manga, and there's nothing else going on, right? Going back without seeing his drawing speed or asking what Kurokawa Kazuya planned to do next.
Oh, there's no need, Yoshikawa Daishi nodded. His sister is coming back, and judging from his behavior during our phone call earlier, I don't think he wants us to disturb him.
No, there's no need. Kazuya coincidentally pushed the door open. Having occasional guests is fine, and besides, Iwamoto Yu was curious. I think my sister might have ambitions to become a mangaka too, even though she's young and hasn't learned manga yet. But who knows what might happen in the future. It's good to meet people occasionally and build connections. Haha, building connections. Huh? Kurokawa-sensei doesn't hold back, Yoshikawa Daishi laughed. Well, that sounds good. So, Iwamoto-kun, let's stay for dinner today and then leave. I'm actually getting hungry. Sure. Well then, since your little sister hasn't come back yet, let me ask, what are your plans for this manga after the third part? Will it conclude, or will there be a fourth part? There will be a fourth part. Kazuya thought for a moment and said, I've currently planned up to the 7th part. The 7th part? That's amazing. Yoshikawa Daishi's eyes sparkled. That could easily be serialized for over 10 years. Yeah, maybe, Kazuya thought for a moment. As for the 8th part, he was still considering it. After all, he didn't have complete knowledge of the manga. Would he continue with his original creations, or would it conclude after the 7th part? He didn't know. But he wasn't in a hurry. Right now, he was still a beginner in a sense.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure didn't count. His next manga, which he was planning as an original work, would test his storyboarding and creative abilities.
So, can you tell me a rough outline of the 4th part?
Iwamoto Yu sighed slightly, feeling that he was quite useless as an editor. Well, perhaps he still had some use, like picking up the original manuscripts.
The mangaka he had worked with before had never encountered such a situation. It was really hard to say whether he should be happy or frustrated.
I'm back. Just then, a voice came from the entrance. You're back, Kazumi. Kazuya smiled at Kazumi as she walked in and said, Great, dinner has been ready for a while. If you don't eat now, it'll get cold.
Yes, Oni-chan. Kazumi looked at Kazuya and lowered her voice, saying, Hey, Oni-chan. I found 2 pairs of shoes at the doorstep. Did someone come over? Although she said this, she had already guessed the situation based on the phone call from that day. It was probably that editor. However, what surprised her was that those people hadn't left yet. Oh, it's because your brother's manga is so exciting that it caught their attention. They just finished reading and haven't eaten yet, so they decided to stay for dinner. How about it? If you don't like it, your brother can chase them away. No, it's fine. Kazumi quickly waved her hand. It's just that. I found this on my way back.
As she spoke, Kazumi opened her backpack and took out a soft and fluffy little kitten. It looks like it was abandoned, so I brought it home. Meow. Is that so? Kazuya thought for a moment. Do you have any ideas about it?
Me? Yeah. Kazuya nodded. Do you want to take care of it yourself? Can I? Kazumi said with some excitement. Of course, it's up to you. Kazuya nodded. If you want to take care of it, you can keep it. But first, we need to get it vaccinated.
Okay, I understand. Meow meow, meow. A small calico cat lay on the balcony, basking in the sun. It let out a yawn and squinted its eyes as it watched Kazuya, who was drawing manga behind the closed curtains. At last, things have settled down. The little cat thought to itself, letting out another soft meow. My name is Orlina, from the noble planet of Meow. Due to various accidents, I ended up here on this place called Earth, endured hunger but was finally rescued by these somewhat discerning natives. However, they think I carry some sort of germs and insist on giving me vaccines. It hurts so much, but, oh well, I'll forgive them since they feed me. Kazuya looked at the relaxed cat drawing 2 casual strokes of a cat on a nearby piece of paper. He then took the drawing and walked over to place it beside the small cat on the balcony. It's for you. Do you like it? Meow, what's this? It's ugly. The cat responded.
It looks like you really like it, Kazuya nodded. He didn't mind having a cat around, especially one that was well behaved and didn't disrupt his manga drawing or shed fur everywhere. That's why he allowed it to stay in his workspace. Otherwise, he would have sent it away long ago. However, what amused him was that this cat didn't eat cat food but insisted on eating the same food as them.
Meow meow, who said I like it? Don't make wild guesses when you can't understand meow speak. Are you hungry or thirsty? Meow, tisk, earthlings are rubbish. They can't even understand meow speak. Kazuya poured some water into a bowl and placed it in front of the cat. Here you go. As for dinner, we'll decide when Kazumi comes back.
Meow, meow, fine, I'm a little thirsty anyway. Consider it a favor.
Watching the cat drink the water, Kazuya nodded. It seemed the cat was indeed thirsty. While he had never owned a cat before, he felt he was starting to understand their behavior.
With nothing else to do, he returned to his manga drawing. He was working on his new original manga, Battle Royale.
For Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, he wasn't in a hurry. He only needed to create a couple of color pages when necessary. Right now, his priority was his new manga. That was the content of Battle Royale. Recently, he had been following someone who had survived to the end, the last person standing. In other words, he could finally use that person as the protagonist for his manga. However, some modifications were necessary. For example, in his dream, the person who survived to the end was a middle-aged ex-soldier in his 30s or 40s. Moreover, he was highly experienced and had noticed Kazuya multiple times during his pursuit.
As a result, Kazuya had gained some experience in this regard.
But, this person's appearance was a problem. That wouldn't work. Supporting characters could use their original appearances, with some emphasis on expressions, but they still needed to be transformed from 3-dimensional to 2-dimensional. They didn't have to be good-looking. However, the protagonist was different. Even if they weren't good-looking, they needed to have some unique features. This included their clothing, which had to be distinct from others. Even their names had to be carefully chosen, not too ordinary, but not too flashy either. So, from earlier until now, he had been designing the protagonist's appearance and trying to find one he personally liked. The same applied to the name. After flipping through the dictionary for a while, he settled on Horikawa Kira, which seemed decent. Not only the protagonist but also the female characters underwent this treatment. All beautified. For male characters, he beautified 1 or 2 main ones, and even drew a few ugly ones. But for female characters, after careful consideration, he decided to beautify all of them. Busts were drawn a bit fuller, although not overly so, with 2 flat-chested characters added for variety. He drew the faces nicely, made the legs longer, and refined their features. Character design took half a day. Finally, he started to draw. He was starting to draw his first original manga. Except for the plot, which didn't need to be created, it was time to test his skills and imagination with regard to storyboarding, character portrayal, and more. Ring 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 ring. Kazuya looked up at the time. Time flies. It's already this late. He furrowed his brows, looking at the unfinished manuscript for the second chapter in front of him. As expected, the speed of drawing for an original work is so slow. It's several times slower. It seems like it will take around 3 days to finish drawing a single chapter. That's slow.
This speed was drastically different from when he was drawing Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Previously, he could complete a chapter in a few hours, but now it took several days.
Well, I guess I'll stop here for now. I'll continue after dinner when Kazumi gets back. He tidied up the manuscript and cleaned the table. Kohana, I'm going out. It's dinner time.
Meow. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, nearly a month had gone by. The year 1984 had come to an end, and it was now 1985. One notable event was the New Year's gathering in January.
Kazuya considered attending just to see what the mangaka of this era were like. Oni-chan, have fun at the party. Kazumi said to her brother.
Sure, I'll be back soon. Is it okay for you to stay at home alone while I'm gone? Working on your own manga? Kazuya asked. Yeah, it's fine. I have Kohana to keep me company. Alright. Kazuya sighed. That's good. Having Kohana around is really nice. He smiled, then headed out. Kurokawa-san, please get in the car. Oh, thank you. Kazuya nodded as he looked at the chauffeured car in slight surprise. He hadn't expected Jump to be so well developed in this era.
If we depart now, we'll arrive about 20 minutes early. How would you like to proceed? Just head straight there, Kazuya said. He couldn't deny that he felt nervous about the gathering, it was impossible not to.
In this era, he was only familiar with one mangaka, Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball. He had less of an impression of other popular series like Hokuto no Ken, which was a big hit in Jump, or the recently concluded Cat's Eye.
However, Dragon Ball was a significant part of his childhood, so he was quite excited to meet Akira Toriyama in person. Kurokawa Kazuya. Tasaka Tokiomi looked at the name of this young mangaka from Jump and smiled slightly. Since when did you start paying attention to this kind of thing, dear? Tasaka Aoi poured a cup of tea for Tasaka Tokiomi. Thank you, Tasaka Tokiomi smiled and replied, it's nothing, but on my way back from the clock tower today, I heard the name, Kurokawa Kazuya, so I decided to take a look. After all, he's one of those ordinary people who dare to venture into the mystical world. Ah, are you talking about the one from over a year ago? That's right, Tasaka Tokiomi nodded. However, he doesn't seem to know that our Tasaka family is a lineage of magus. So, he approached as a future mangaka to gather material. Honestly, if it were the head of the Meitu family, he would probably be dead by now. He had a strong impression of that incident. In all these years, rather than being a magus or anyone else involved in the mystical world, that person was a completely ordinary individual who dared to enter this realm. He could only give him a bold evaluation. No, even simply calling him bold was an understatement, it could be described as reckless. Moreover, that person seemed to know about the Holy Grail War. When he saw the command seals on his hand back then, his expression had visibly changed. Although he tried to hide it, Tasaka Tokiomi had noticed. If it weren't for confirming that he lacked magical potential, taking him as an apprentice wouldn't have been a bad choice. But it's fine as it is now. He has achieved considerable success in the outside world, and he can be considered one of the connections of the Tasaka family in the human world. Tasaka Aoi nodded in agreement. She also remembered that person. At the time, Tasaka Tokiomi had felt it was a shame. The guy had a good personality but lacked potential. So, Tasaka Tokiomi had used magecraft to suggest to him that the Tasaka family was just an ordinary family with no mystical presence. As a precaution, he had steered him away, one of the only two magus families in Fuyuki City, from the Meitu family. However, he had also tried to hypnotize him to find out where he had learned all this. Kurokawa Kazuya had claimed he read about it in books. From that, Tasaka Tokiomi had concluded that an ordinary person had somehow obtained information about their three great families from books. He didn't pay it much mind and didn't bother to inquire further about the source, there were too many such books. So, in the end, Kurokawa Kazuya had concluded that the Tasaka family had no trace of mysticism. Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Well, it's not bad to read when you're bored, Tasaka Tokiomi said after making this judgment and didn't think much about it. He was well aware of what constituted the foundation of the Tasaka family. That was magecraft. Perhaps in the human world, it should be called magic. However, in their world, not just anyone can be called a magic user who is also known as a magician, only those who possess the qualifications as 5 true magics, users were entitled.
All others were simply practitioners of magecraft.
Compared to Kurokawa Kazuya's actions, what worried him more was something else.
That was his 2 daughters, Tasaka Rin and Tasaka Sakura. Both had exceptional potential, and Aoi was undoubtedly a qualified mother. In fact, it was more than just qualified, she had given birth to 2 children with extraordinary potential.
But, this was both a blessing and a curse. They had 2 children who could inherit his position, but there was only one family crest of the Tasaka family that represented the head. Now, he had 3 options. One was to have one of his daughters inherit the family crest, and the second was to hand it over to the Mages Association. This was the option he least wanted to choose.
The second option was to hope that the Matu family, their neighbors, didn't have a suitable heir, and then have one of his daughters inherit the Matu family's family crest. However, this depended on chance, as nobody knew if there was a qualified heir in the Matu family in this generation. Although there should already be a conclusion, he hadn't inquired. This would make the head of the Matu family anxious, allowing him to negotiate more favorable terms. The third option was the best possible outcome. That was if a declining Magus family offered their family crest for sale. This could be described as an extremely rare occurrence that only happened once in a century, and even if it did happen, it was a question of whether he had the funds to buy it. However, if it succeeded, it was undoubtedly the best choice.
Hey, Kurokawa-sensei, you're here. Iwamoto-san. Kazuya turned around and said, how's it going? Are there any mangaka who haven't arrived?
Why are you asking that? Iwamoto asked with a puzzled expression.
Oh, I heard that if there are mangaka who haven't come, the responsible editor will face some penalties, and I'm quite interested in that. Ah, where did you hear that from? Who knows? Kazuya replied casually. Iwamoto's mouth twitched as he said, well, everyone who should have come is here. Is that so? Kazuya nodded. It's a shame, we missed a performance. I thought there might still be someone missing. Iwamoto's face turned sour. How did he not notice this guy's terrible personality earlier? It seemed like he had time but didn't show up just to avoid embarrassing himself. Alright, then, how about you introduce us to the other mangaka? Sure, let me take you over. Let's start with Tetsuo Hara-sensei. This year, Yoshiyuki Okamura-sensei couldn't make it. What? Didn't someone not show up? Well, but they're a team, so one of them is enough. I see, that's a shame. Kazuya nodded. He recalled Tetsuo Hara. He was currently serializing the manga, Hokuto no Ken, which had been consistently ranked first in recent years. The protagonist was a man with 7 stars on his chest. He hadn't read the manga in his previous life, watched only 2 episodes of the anime, which must have been around 2015 or 2016 when he watched it. He didn't continue because the animation style seemed too dated. On the contrary, after coming to this world, he had read some of the mangas serialized on Jump to get a sense of the manga of this era. Tetsuo Hara-sensei is about your age. Well, actually, he's a year older than you. I think you should have a lot in common. Ah, found him, over there. Iwamoto Yu led them towards a man and said, Tetsuo Hara-sensei, this is the editor, Iwamoto Yu. Oh, hello there. Who's this? I'm the mangaka who draws Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, Kurokawa Kazuya. Nice to meet you, Tetsuo Hara-senpai. Oh, you're the one who draws Jojo. Tetsuo Hara looked pleasantly surprised as he looked up at the taller Kurokawa Kazuya. I didn't expect that. You look about the same age as me. I really like your manga. He then struck a pose reminiscent of Dio from Jojo and asked, do you remember how many breads have you eaten in your life? Haha, you flatter me, but I really love the manga, Hokuto no Ken, especially that line, Ome wa mo shindiru. It's so powerful, Kazuya chuckled. I think that line is cool too, and you say it in a cool way. But that was thought of by Baronson-sensei. My main responsibility is the manga, replied Tetsuo Hara, sighing. Especially when combined with Kurokawa Kazuya's height, it seems strangely persuasive. Of course, the artwork is excellent too, capturing that feeling perfectly. Kazuya nodded. He couldn't help but feel that he and Tetsuo Hara were somewhat similar now. Both mangaka who drew the visuals themselves while relying on others for the story. As they were chatting, Iwamoto Yu, the editor, interjected, well, why don't you two continue chatting?
I'll go check when the other sensei I'm responsible for will arrive.
Sure, thank you, Iwamoto-san, Kazuya nodded. No need to be polite, Kurokawa-sensei. I'll be on my way then. Okay, Kazuya nodded and looked at Tetsuo Hara. This is my first time here. It's not your first time, is it, Tetsuo Hara-senpai? It's my second time, Tetsuo Hara replied, glancing around and whispering, hey, I heard that you don't need assistance, and you handle all the original drawings by yourself. Is that true? Yes, it's true, Kazuya nodded. Wow, that's really impressive. I can't do without assistance. Yeah, by the way, where are the other sensei? Like Kira Toriyama-sensei.
Are you in a hurry? Iwamoto asked. Yes, Kazuya nodded. While this is a great opportunity for research, I'm a bit worried about my little sister being alone at home. I'm planning to meet the current sensei and then head back. I see, that's a shame. The second part has a lot of interesting things. Hey, sensei, want to take a photo? A person holding a camera approached them.
Sure, let's take one. And please give me a copy of the photo later. Kazuya nodded and took a photo with Tetsuo Hara. Afterward, he met Akira Toriyama.
However, they didn't say much. Akira Toriyama was summoned away by the editor.
It turned out that the original manuscript for the next serialization hadn't been completed. He was threatened that if he didn't finish it, he would have to come to work in Tokyo.
After I finish drawing Dragon Ball and earn enough money, I'm retiring. Being a mangaka is exhausting. I don't want to do it anymore. He repeated similar lines 3 times before being taken away by the editor. After some time had passed, Kazuya decided to leave because he was worried about his little sister being alone at home. By the way, what have you been busy with lately, sensei? Iwamoto asked Kurokawa Kazuya. Is it the manga I saw last time? Yes, that's right, Kazuya nodded. I'll show it to you after I finish. Well, after you finish it. Iwamoto's mouth twitched. Most mangaka usually completed 1 or 2 chapters, but in this case, it was only after everything was finished. Truly worthy of being Kurokawa-sensei. That speed at which he drew manga was astonishing to both himself and the chief editor. It was unlikely that anyone could match it. No one could surpass this speed. Alright, if there's nothing else, I'll head back now. I'll call you once I've finished the manga, Kazuya said. However, it would still take several hours to get back from here, and his little sister was probably already asleep when he arrived home. Should he consider moving to Tokyo in the future? No, maybe not. Finally. Horikawa Kira panted and looked around at his surroundings. Finally, he glanced at his wristwatch. The number 1 on it was so prominent. I survived. Rumbling sounds filled the air, and at that moment, a helicopter flew slowly overhead and stopped above him. Finally. I can go back. He began to say but suddenly froze. He clearly saw someone in the helicopter aiming a sniper rifle at his head. Before he could react, a bullet hit him in the head. Surprise, confusion, hope followed by despair. These emotions were imprinted on his face. Next to him, Kazuya, who had a hole in his head, vigorously lifted his head to imprint this scene in his eyes. In the next moment, he woke up. He rubbed his head and took the prepared paper by the bedside, then drew the final face of that person. Because it was in a dream. Dying multiple times allowed him to gradually gain control over his awakening. Even if he died, as long as he insisted on keeping himself awake to draw, he could stay in that world for about 5 minutes. This time, he deliberately left behind the final expression of the protagonist, just to see it. Yes, the protagonist dies at the end of the manga. From beginning to end, they were all just a bunch of clowns, clearing the stage as one batch died and the next batch appeared. My head hurts a bit. It must be because I didn't sleep well last night. Kazuya rubbed his head. But after this manga ends, I can take a break and get a good night's sleep. As for the next manga, just copy another manga. After completing a manga, there should be a lottery. He wondered if he would have the chance to draw abilities from his own original short story. Would he have the opportunity to draw abilities and such? But upon careful thought, there weren't any special abilities in his manga. Well, forget it, there was no need to rush about such things. Soon, the final chapter was finished. The layouts had all been completed earlier, what he needed was just one expression. A sense of realism, Kazuya looked through his manga from beginning to end once more,
nodded in satisfaction, and was reminded that the mangaka who had influenced him the most when he became an mangaka wasn't one from the real world but Rohan Kishibe from Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. Rohan Kishibe's motto was, "Realism is the most important in manga." He had been deeply influenced by that. While he was drawing Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, it was fine, but when he was drawing this one himself, everyone's daily life, little actions, the terrain of hiding places, the visuals of bullets hitting heads, the splattering of blood, the effects of knives cutting into people. All of it was based on what he had seen with his own eyes, striving for as much realism as possible. He knew there were some logical flaws in the manga, but he considered them normal. Not understanding someone else's thought process didn't mean that they wouldn't do it. Everyone had different ideas. What one person considered impossible, others might find completely reasonable. Therefore, the main tone of this manga was perfectly established, realism. How was it? Looking at Iwamoto Yu, who had just finished reading all 29 chapters of Battle Royale, Kazuya asked. Well, the story is very interesting. The art style is excellent. Everything inside it gives a very realistic feeling, and it has a strong sense of immersion. I even saw a shadow of myself in one of the characters, even though I died early. Iwamoto Yu said, pausing for a moment. Is there a problem? Kazuya asked. Yes, Iwamoto Yu nodded and said firmly, well, this manga, Battle Royale, cannot be serialized in Jump. Well, when I think about it carefully, you're right, Kazuya thought for a moment and nodded. Exactly. Because it's too realistic. It even made me doubt if this had really happened in reality. Iwamoto Yu sighed, and JUMP's principles are effort, friendship, and victory. But in this, I can't see any of that. The worst aspects of human nature are laid bare here. Everyone is like that. Although some characters have moments of humanity, there is no concept of good deeds lead to good rewards, they all just die. Go on, Kazuya frowned. And the protagonist of this manga, apart from looking good, is just a scumbag, right? Iwamoto Yu said, but this kind of scumbag is the protagonist of this manga. Even though he lost a hand and an ear during the process, he still survives until the end. It even gives me an uncomfortable feeling like, how can such a scumbag survive until the end? So, ironically, the most satisfying part of this manga for me is the death of the protagonist at the end. It gives me a refreshing feeling. I see. Kazuya nodded. I tried to prioritize realism, but I didn't expect it to have such flaws. Indeed, this thing was too realistic. There was no trace of artistic embellishment, was there? But, Kurokawa-sensei, this manga is undoubtedly quite interesting. If possible, I hope it can be submitted to Weekly YOUNGJUMP. It's more suitable for their audience compared to Shonen Jump. Well, feel free to do so, Kazuya nodded. This work seemed to have failed in some way. Although it had failed, it had also provided valuable lessons. The next manga could be improved. Iwamoto Yu also breathed a sigh of relief. If his words hadn't had any effect, he would have had to take drastic measures. However, now, although he hadn't asked him to change this manga, the next manga didn't need to pursue such realism. But not asking him to change also had its own selfish reasons. Because this manga fascinated him. And what attracted him was none other than that sense of realism. Although it was unlikely to be serialized in Shonen Jump due to its launch reasons and the audience it faced, there were fewer restrictions in Weekly YOUNGJUMP. As Iwamoto Yu had expected, Battle Royale was soon serialized in Weekly YOUNGJUMP. However, to his disappointment, he wasn't the editor in charge of it, which meant Kurokawa Kazuya had gained another responsible editor. Although this editor was handed a manga that had already been completed and not serialized, he couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the photocopy of the manuscript in his hands. According to what the chief editor and she had been told, this was a manga drawn by a mangaka from Shonen Jump in his spare time. Because it didn't fit the tone of Shonen Jump at all, it was brought over here for serialization. They said the chief editor had given this manga unanimous praise. The mangaka, I remember, is it Kurokawa Kazuya? Okada Tomomi knew this person's name. He was currently a mangaka serializing in Shonen Jump. In the future, she would have to go over to discuss the payment, but right now, this manga would be serialized in the next issue. Really?
Are all mangaka this talented nowadays? They can draw so much even while serializing in Jump. Okada Tomomi sighed with emotion. Oh, you're talking about Kurokawa-sensei, right? Her colleague said. Yes, Okada Tomomi nodded. And he just landed in my lap like this. I haven't even met him yet.
Suguru Fumiko smiled and said, yes, it's the first time something like this has happened here, right? But, should I tell you some inside information?
What is it? Okada Tomomi asked, curious about the person she would be responsible for.
You see, Kurokawa-sensei, he's rumored not to need assistance.
Huh? Really? Yes, it's true. But don't spread it around, Suguru Fumiko said. And, not needing assistance, he's drawn this new manga. I overheard that the manga he's currently serializing in Jump, the completed original manuscripts have been enough for serialization for a long time. Now, I heard he's even creating a new manga. Is it true? Okada Tomomi widened her eyes, a bit skeptical about this. He was already serializing one, and now she had the second one. If he continued, it would be the third. And he didn't need assistance. Was he even human? In her mind, she conjured an image of a man with 8 hands, eyes gleaming like a monster. It's definitely true. Well, he's going to be your responsibility next, right? You'll find out everything you need to know. Yeah, Okada Tomomi nodded, swallowed hard, and then opened the manuscript in front of her.
After traveling for several hours by train, Okada Tomomi finally arrived in this town, Mariah. She looked at the house in front of her and breathed a sigh of relief. Really, don't most mangaka live in Tokyo? It's so far. Before coming here, she had specifically gone to inquire about the situation from her colleague Iwamoto Yu, who is now responsible for him. According to him, she couldn't visit on Saturdays and Sundays, only on weekdays from Monday to Friday. He even shut out the chief editor on Saturdays and Sundays. It was said that on Mondays, Iwamoto Yu and Yoshikawa Daishi stayed in a hotel in Mariah overnight to see him as soon as possible. They rushed here right after his little sister went to school. It's really tough. This time, she wasn't here to discuss the manga, it was about discussing the payment. Now, although he was a newly serialized mangaka, he was already enjoying the payment of a popular mangaka who had been serialized for several years. Although he was also beginning to gain popularity now. Let's ring the doorbell now. Thinking so, she reached out her hand and pressed the doorbell button on the wall. Click. Just then, the door of the room suddenly opened, and a hand grabbed her arm. Ah, Okada Tomomi almost screamed. Who are you? Kazuya pushed the door open and said. I'm Okada Tomomi, an editor from Shueisha, responsible for editing Kurokawa-sensei's new serialization in Weekly Youngjump. May I ask if you are? Okada Tomomi looked at Kurokawa Kazuya in front of her with a pounding heart. She had just been scared to death, her heart felt like it had received a massive shock. I see, Kazuya nodded, an editor from Shueisha. So, I am the mangaka Kurokawa Kazuya you're looking for. Please come in. Huh? You're Kurokawa-sensei? Okada Tomomi said in disbelief. Not the monster with 8 arms she had imagined, but this person. He looked quite young, and handsome. What's wrong? Don't just stand at the door. No, nothing, I'm coming. Okada Tomomi hastily walked in. Meow, oh, a cat. All right, Kohana, stay here for a while, Kazuya said to the cat, then looked at Okada Tomomi and said, well, let's sit here. Yes, Okada Tomomi nodded and sat down, taking on her role as an editor. Here's the contract. I brought it with me this time. Please check if there are any errors or omissions. All right, Kazuya nodded and opened the folder to examine it carefully. This still needed to be carefully examined. Although a big company like Shueisha wouldn't scam a small mangaka like him, well, when you thought about it carefully, it wasn't really a joke, it was just a precaution. Better safe than sorry. After checking the prices per page, as well as the current situation, Kazuya nodded in satisfaction, confirming that there were no errors or omissions. All right, then it's settled. Oh, that's great. So let's sign the contract, and about the seal. I have it here, Kazuya said. Wait for a moment, I'll go upstairs to get it. All right. Kazuya smiled and went upstairs. After finalizing this deal, he would earn more than 10 million yen.
This was just the basic price calculated at 15,000 yen per page. It didn't even take into account future possibilities like tankobon releases and copyright fees. If he were to serialize in Shonen Jump, the price per page would increase, likely reaching around 20,000 yen per page. Of course, that was just his estimate.
But if he were to hire assistants, the situation would change significantly, and he would probably have to share about half of the earnings. That was common for regular mangaka. However, he wasn't a regular mangaka. He didn't need assistants, not to mention he would be the one overseeing the whole process.
Okada Tomomi once again felt her lack of presence and significance as an editor. But, in the end, it was a project that fell from the sky, and she didn't have to do much. It wasn't a bad thing.
Well, everything on my end is settled, Kazuya said in satisfaction.
It's almost spring break. How about taking Kazumi somewhere to play? Kazuya looked at the calendar in front of him. There were only 3 days left until Kazumi's school started spring break. Unlike his past life, Japan had 3 major school breaks each year: winter break, spring break, and summer break.
During winter break, he didn't have much time because he was focused on drawing his new manga. Therefore, during spring break, he and Kazumi usually played with his classmates. But now that spring break was approaching, not going on a trip was out of the question. As for the destination, he had already decided. In manga, what's important is realism. Although his pursuit of realism had led to a failure because it was too realistic, he didn't plan to give up on that aspect. He could make the story a bit more fictional, romantic, and filled with storytelling elements, but he wouldn't compromise on certain descriptions. However, he thought about places he wanted to visit, and he also wanted to check if Kazumi had any places she wanted to go. In the evening, after dinner, Kazuya looked at Kazumi, who had finished her homework, and asked, "Spring break is coming soon. Is there anywhere you'd like to go?" "Huh, we're going on a trip for spring break?" Kazumi asked in surprise. "Yes, anywhere is fine. It doesn't have to be in Japan, it can be in other countries too. And we can visit several places if you want, as long as we can return before school starts." "Hooray!" Kazumi cheered. "So, is there any place you'd like to go?" Kazumi thought for a moment and shook her head. "I haven't decided yet, it's so sudden." "Well, if you have any ideas, just let me know." "Anywhere is fine."
Yeah, Kazumi nodded enthusiastically. "What about you, Oni-chan? Do you have a place you want to go?" "Ah, yes," Kazuya nodded. "I plan to make a trip to England. I want to visit the British Museum and King Arthur's tomb." Of course, if he had enough time, he also wanted to visit the Louvre. But that wasn't urgent. He could go anytime, and if there was still time after visiting the places Kazumi wanted to go, he would consider it. If not, then so be it. "By the way, Oni-chan, what about Kohana?" Kazumi asked.
Meow, you finally remembered me. I want to go too," Kohana exclaimed.
"Well, I don't think they allow cats on planes," Kazuya said. Although he vaguely remembered the existence of specialized pet carriers, that was in the 21st century, and he didn't know if such carriers existed in this era, especially in Japan.
But taking this little troublemaker with them would be too troublesome. It was better not to.
"Oh, what about Kohana?" Kazumi asked in surprise. Wouldn't she starve to death if she wasn't taken care of for so many days?
"I'll ask someone to take care of her for a while."
"Ask who?" The editor, Kazuya, smiled and said. Truly a free-spirited mangaka," Iwamoto Yu sighed as he looked at the cat in front of him.
Such a guy was rare. He had said he was going on a trip with his little sister and asked him to take care of the cat. Most mangaka didn't even have the money for this, let alone the energy.
But, in that case, the third manga will be delayed, won't it? Well, how should he put it? He had actually relaxed a bit. "Meow, it seems you're very unhappy too, huh? That guy." Starting from Japan, their first destination was London, England, with the primary goal of visiting the British Museum. Afterward, they would head to Paris, France, with plans to visit the Louvre and Disneyland Paris. The latter was a place Kazumi wanted to go. She had already been to Disneyland in Japan and wanted to see what the one in Paris was like. Their next stop would be Hawaii. Kazuya was quite curious about this renowned tourist destination.
As for language, they didn't have to worry. Kazuya was proficient in both English and French, enabling them to communicate smoothly. They were well prepared with a high-quality camera.
He had done some research, and both the British Museum and the Louvre allowed photography. This was a big plus for them. The items inside could serve as excellent source material. "Is this London?" After getting off the plane, Kazumi said with some discomfort. It was her first time on a plane, and she felt quite uneasy. "All right, we've finally arrived in London. Let's rest at the hotel today, and we'll start exploring tomorrow," Kazuya said. While he had invested most of his money in real estate in Tokyo, even taking out a substantial loan, he had used the money to purchase more properties and continued this cycle. However, he still had funds for their trip. He had his reasons for investing in real estate.
Now, it's already 1985, and he vaguely remembers what happened next. The specific reasons are forgotten, but he just remembers that Japan experienced a period of significant economic prosperity from the end of 1986 until the beginning of 1991. Real estate prices skyrocketed. Although there may have been other factors, it was not something he could intervene in. He wasn't very clear about it, nor did he plan to get involved. He had forgotten the specific dates from 1986 to 1991. He roughly remembered that during that time, the Japanese yen had risen from 240 yen per US dollar to 120 yen per US dollar. He didn't need to wait until that exact moment. Just to be safe, he could sell when the exchange rate was around 130 yen per US dollar. He remembered the Black Monday in 1987 in the United States from reading novels, but he only knew it was on a Monday. He didn't bother with specific dates like that. He wouldn't get involved. However, if he replaced the specific date with a specific year, he could get involved. There was only one reason he wanted to make money like this. He wasn't particularly interested in money itself, nor did he have any desire to become the protagonist of an urban novel or the owner of a multinational corporation. He knew he didn't have the capability for that. Although he had some understanding of future trends, knew some general trends, and was prepared to invest in them, the fundamental reason was one and only one. He needed money to create anime. In this era, there were also animations, but the visual effects and quality were unsatisfactory to him. He wanted to bring Jojo's Bizarre Adventure to the television screen and turn it into an anime. However, in this era, achieving the quality he had seen in Jojo's Bizarre Adventure was probably impossible. But if he had money, he could get closer, infinitely closer. There was nothing in this world that money couldn't achieve. If something couldn't be done, it simply meant that there wasn't enough money. He didn't want to produce subpar work. Everything else could be compromised, but Jojo absolutely could not. What he wanted to do was wait until the Japanese economy faced a major depression, gather a group of talented individuals, directly acquire several animation companies because those people had experience. Then produce Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. At that time, the main approach would be to spend money. With money, combined with the image he had in his mind of the Jojo he had seen, there would be nothing he couldn't achieve. Of course, he thought like this now, but he might encounter difficulties later. However, he absolutely couldn't lack money. No matter how long it took or how many times he had to start over, he had to achieve the best possible result according to his vision. By then, he should be able to cash out billions of yen, a massive fortune even in this era. He didn't know if this fortune would be enough to acquire studio. Of course, that was a joke. He planned to spend it all on producing Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, as many episodes as possible. Whether anyone watched it or not, he didn't care. But it had to be done, and the sooner, the better. This was the faith of a Jojo fan. Anyway, he wasn't short of money. His monthly income from Jojo was enough to live comfortably. Nevertheless, even so, he had no intention of being frugal in his life. He still set aside ample funds for leisure, enough to travel around with his younger sister. Even if it was just a short weekend break, he often took her out for a relaxing time. He felt that this was what life was all about. Dreams existed, freedom existed, and there were no troubles. This kind of life felt like a dream, and sometimes he thought that if it were a dream, he would prefer to stay lost in it forever and never wake up. "Wake up, little sleepyhead." Kazuya patted Kazumi's small head. Let me sleep a little longer, just 5 more minutes." "All right." Kazuya chuckled and pulled back the curtains, looking at the streets of the country he had come to for the second time.
This was why he had deliberately chosen a room with a window. He had been here in his previous life, and his personality was the same as in his past life. When he had money, he would travel everywhere, and he would spend until he had no money left. There was no restraint. No matter how much he earned each month, in the days just before getting paid, he would always end up eating instant noodles.
When he earned less, he would play nearby, and when he earned more, he would travel abroad. He had learned a bit of English and French at that time, bit by bit. Besides that, he knew a bit of Spanish, but it was the kind where he could understand but needed several seconds to think for conversation and often made grammatical errors. However, in his previous life, he had never been to places like the British Museum. He had been to King Arthur's tomb, gone to places for occult card draws, and well, he had gotten results. It turned out that the occult was invincible. But this time, he wanted to visit the British Museum. And this ample budget and preparation were something his previous self had never experienced. It's been 5 minutes already. If you don't get up, you'll have to stay in the hotel all day, and I'll go out alone. Wait for me. Kazumi quickly sat up and said, her whole demeanor becoming alert. Then she muttered, Oni-chan always tries to scare me. Haha, it's because it's not early anymore. Let's finish up quickly, so we can go to Disneyland sooner, okay? You wanted to see the difference between French Disneyland and the one in Japan, right?
Yes, in a dimly lit room specially constructed in London, England, a figure with an obscured face sat in the shadows. Sir, do we have enough people? A man knelt before him, half bowed. Not enough, the figure with the obscured face replied. To summon our god, we need more sacrifices, 10 more young boys and girls. Yes, I understand, God's envoy, the man said. The man before him possessed a peculiar ability. It was said that he was a magician and, at the same time, rumored to be a messenger of the gods. However, most often, they simply referred to him as God's envoy. The missing persons case in London. A man named Emiya Kiritsugu muttered quietly within a hotel room as he looked at the newspaper in front of him. All the missing individuals are boys and girls under the age of 15. However, it has nothing to do with me. If it had been his former self, he would have rushed to eliminate these kidnappers. However, he didn't have the time now. The Holy Grail War in Fuyuki City, Japan, was only a few years away, and he had been preparing and gathering information since then. Although he had people inside the clock tower and the support of the Einsborn family behind him, there was some information he had to obtain on his own. It's about time. Standing up and placing the newspaper on the table, Kiritsugu slowly walked towards the door. He glanced back at the newspaper on the table. It's almost time. 3 years from now, in 3 years, he would surely obtain the Holy Grail, and at that time, once he fulfilled his wish, events like this would never exist in this world again. He intended to save this world. With his determination renewed, Kiritsugu left the room. We've arrived. Is this the British Museum? Kazuya remarked with nostalgia. Having a camera is really convenient. Oni-chan, let's go. Kazumi, holding Kazuya's hand, smiled and said, looking around. Ah, let's go inside. The two of them walked in, beginning their first day of the journey. After a day of exploration, Kazumi, his sister, was tired and had returned to the hotel to rest. However, Kazuya decided to take a walk and explore London in this era. That man. Kazuya hesitated for a moment. This man seemed oddly familiar. Perhaps he should approach him and find out more. It's about time. Kiritsugu checked the time. The person who was supposed to deliver him information hadn't shown up. It seemed he had been stood up today. Wait a moment, sir. Just then, a young man walked up to Kiritsugu and took a seat. He looked at Kiritsugu, who was about to stand up, and said, Sir, could you tell me your name? What's the matter? Kiritsugu frowned and reached beneath his clothing, ready to act. It seemed this man didn't want him to leave. There were quite a few people around, so the man probably wouldn't make a move, but Kiritsugu wanted to be prepared just in case. Actually, I'm a mangaka. My name is Kurakawa Kazuya. I'm here in England for tourism and inspiration. I felt a sense of inspiration from you. Like you have an interesting story to tell. So, may I have a conversation with you? Are you Japanese? Kiritsugu furrowed his brows and switched to Japanese. Until then, they had been speaking in English, but the last sentence was in Japanese. Kazuya, surprised, switched to Japanese as well. "Oh, you're also Japanese?" Kazuya seemed a bit surprised. Earlier, they had conversed in English, but Kiritsugu had suddenly switched to Japanese. He handed over his business card to Kiritsugu, placing it on the table, then rested his hands on the table. Kiritsugu frowned slightly but didn't use his hand. Instead, he used a nearby coffee cup to turn the business card around. "I apologize, but I have a bit of a germ phobia."
"Ah, it's okay." Kiritsugu nodded and looked at the business card, but most of his attention was still on the man in front of him.
Indeed, he couldn't sense any magical energy from the man, but Kiritsugu was a mage killer who had encountered numerous people like this. Besides, who knew if this man was a magus skilled enough to hide his magical energy? He couldn't be too careful. His origin bullet-loaded pistol was in the backpack by his feet. In England, the headquarters of the magus, he couldn't afford to be without his most powerful magecraft equipment. Just now, even with a business card, there could have been some magical spell inscribed on it. Using the coffee cup to touch it would provide some protection. Although Kiritsugu was a magus, he wasn't particularly skilled in complex spells. As Kiritsugu made his judgment, Kazuya was also trying to assess the situation. Was this man? "Well, I see. So, what do you want to ask?" Kiritsugu said this and slowly let down his guard. Indeed, there was no magical aura emanating from this man, and it wasn't concealed in any way. In this case, there were only three possibilities. 1. He was so powerful that his vigilance meant nothing. 2. He was so weak that he didn't need to be cautious. 3. He wasn't a magus at all, as he claimed, just an ordinary person. Given the current situation, the third possibility seemed more likely, and regardless of which possibility it was, there was no need for him to continue being on guard. "Well, as you can see, I'm a mangaka, and the one thing a mangaka lacks the most is stories. I just took a quick look from afar and was pretty sure that you're someone with a story. So, may I hear your story?"
Kiritsugu let out a sigh and said, "Is that so? Well, then, I'll tell you a little."
Maybe he wanted to vent, or perhaps it was some other reason. Kiritsugu himself didn't know why, but he was preparing to talk about his past. "My name is Emiya Kiritsugu." "Huh? What is it? Have you heard of my name before?" Emiya Kiritsugu looked at the expressions on Kazuya's faces and became cautious once again. Although Kazuya were trying hard to suppress his expressions, there was still that split second. His pupils contracted ever so slightly. Was this person really Emiya Kiritsugu? And then, in that split second, Emiya Kiritsugu noticed it, and this assassin noticed it. In that split second, Kazuya's minds flashed with two thoughts.
1. Does this world contain a hidden world unknown to ordinary people? 2. This guy is starting to get cautious. Knock, knock. Is Mr. Kurokawa there? The incessant knocking on the door woke up a sleeping Kazumi.
"Who is it?" She rubbed her eyes and grumbled. She knew her brother had gone out, and besides, the person at the door was speaking English, which she didn't quite understand.
I'm from the hotel staff. There's a package for Mr. Kurokawa. Could you accept it?"
"What is he saying?" Kazumi muttered, walking to the door. Instead of opening it, she checked multiple times to make sure it wasn't unlocked and secured the chain lock as well.
Looking at the dressing table nearby and then at her petite figure, she sighed softly.
She couldn't move it. "All right, I'll call Oni-chan."
After saying this, Kazumi picked up the phone at the bedside and dialed her brother's number.
Her brother, Kazuya, had told her, "When you're away from home, trust no one except me. No matter what anyone says, as long as it's not me coming back to open the door, never open it, no matter the reason. When you can't judge the situation, call me. Don't engage in conversation with strangers, and don't listen to what they say. They're all enemies, all trying to harm you for their gain. Just think of it that way. But if you're absolutely sure you can defeat them on every level, then it's okay." As a dutiful sister, she believed her brother's words and thought it was the right thing to do. Therefore, she refused anyone who wasn't introduced by her brother or known to her, no matter who they were.
She would simply decline. Of course, her brother's advice came with a second part. If you're confident you can defeat them in every way, you can disregard it. However, now she didn't believe she was a match, and the person outside the door was an adult, constantly speaking words she couldn't understand. Although she couldn't determine the person's intentions, treating them as an enemy was entirely justified. Ring, ring, ring. The call went through. On the other side, Kazuya and Kiritsugu found themselves in an awkward situation. Kazuya didn't know what to say, while Kiritsugu remained cautious. Indeed, the man might not be a magus, but Kiritsugu, besides having a great reputation in the world of magus, was equally renowned in the world of assassins. He had accepted countless tasks that other assassins couldn't complete. So, it wasn't impossible for him to have attracted someone's attention, even though the person in front of him seemed very amateurish and lacked any signs of bloodlust or killer intent. Perhaps for others, the concept of killer intent was somewhat nebulous, but Kiritsugu had felt it firsthand countless times. It was like the feeling of being stared at by a snake, giving rise to countless goosebumps all over his body. Without a doubt, it was killer intent, and he felt no such thing from the man in front of him. But, for some reason, he was certain of one thing. This man was not right. Ring, ring, ring. Just then, the phone rang. "Ah, I'll take a call." Kazuya sighed with relief, thankful that someone had called at this moment, dissipating the tension in the room. So, he reached for the package on the side. Kiritsugu, on the other hand, put his hand into his chest, ready to release the safety of the gun in his possession. In the moment when Kazuya took something out of the package, in that instant when he judged whether it was a phone or a weapon, it was the moment he would attack. Kazuya also sensed it. Killer intent. He had felt this many times in his dreams, being killed by various firearms countless times. The sensation stirred his soul and made him instinctively want to move away. But he remained rational. The man in front of him was very dangerous. Initially, he had approached carelessly, which was a huge mistake. In the end, it was his curiosity, his recklessness, and other such factors that were playing tricks on him. If he were a more cautious person, he wouldn't have done this. But, being cautious about everything and avoiding everything would be too boring. Such a life would be boring to the point of death. It was not what he wanted. But now, there was no other way. All he could do was stay calm, be cautious, and avoid making any unnecessary moves. Because, he was very clear that if the man in front of him was just an assassin, he still had a chance. But if he was a mage killer, he had no chance at all. Even though he had previously believed that this world was an ordinary world without any trace of magecraft. Even though he had already seen people from the Ryugi and Tasaka families before. Even though Kiritsugu might not be a mage killer, but just an ordinary assassin with the same name and appearance. He was still suppressing his heart. He carefully examined his backpack. Kazumi. Is she awake? Looking at the phone in his backpack, Kazuya said, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. Although the phones of this era didn't have much display functionality, he had two phones in his possession, one that others knew about, like his editor, and another, a phone that nobody else but his sister knew about. And now, his sister's phone was ringing. Click. The phone was taken out. Kiritsugu, who had partially drawn his pistol, retracted it, confirming that it was just a phone. "Hello, Kazumi? What's wrong? Hungry?" The next moment, Kazuya furrowed his brow. No response. Kazumi wasn't answering the call. "Hello, Kazumi? Are you joking with your big brother? Okay, if you want something to eat, I'll bring it to you when I get back. Hello? Hello?" In the hotel room, a man looked at Kazumi, who had collapsed on the floor, picked up the phone, and hung up. Then, he picked up Kazumi and walked out. Hey, hey. Beep, beep, beep. The next moment, Kazuya's face turned cold, and he no longer cared about Kiritsugu's presence. There was no time for that anymore. He had to go back immediately. Sorry, something unexpected seems to have come up. I had to go now." Saying that, he grabbed his bag and sprinted towards the direction of the hotel. Kiritsugu carefully watched his retreating figure. He could have shot him in the back, ending his life with a single shot, but in the end, he didn't. He thought for a moment and said, "Recently, there's a well-known case of missing people in London. Most of the missing are teenagers, and a lot of them are from out of town." "I see. I understand." Kazuya paused for a moment, then left immediately. If Kiritsugu had shot just now, he was confident he could have evaded it, relying on his intuition to dodge countless bullets. But now, there was no time to worry about these things. He had to rush back immediately. And now, he needed to call the police. It was time to dial 999, and he would explain while walking.
He was angry but also very calm right now. Hey, maybe we should just give up.
Inside the room, Bauer looked at his accomplice, who was carrying the young girl, Kazumi.
This little girl is too cautious, isn't she? She just made a phone call, right? Her family could return at any moment. Let's go after those who are less vigilant.
Perhaps you're right, a tall Caucasian man, a head taller than Bauer, said. But it's too late for that now. She's already the 10th one, and we won't need to do this again afterward. Besides, she's an outsider, which makes it more convenient and less likely to cause trouble. And, we have God's envoy on our side here. Well, Bauer thought for a moment but didn't say anything. He had seen the extraordinary abilities of God's envoy firsthand. Maybe, he was right. So, the two of them, holding Kazumi, left the hotel and headed to the car waiting outside. The car already had 6 other boys and girls besides Kazumi, all of them unconscious.
Hey, look at that guy. Bauer pointed to Kazuya, who had just rushed into the hotel. Could he be this girl's family?
Who cares? Let's go. Bang. Kazuya pushed open all the doors in the hotel room but found it empty.
What is this? There were no signs of forced entry on the room's door, and it had naturally opened. However, the iron chain that had been fastened to the door appeared to have been severed by something very sharp, leaving a clean and precise cut.
Is this some kind of laser or something? But for now, the priority is to find Kazumi. Wait a moment, the car at the entrance just now.
He pulled back the room's curtains and could vaguely see the departing car.
Although he couldn't see what was happening inside, the car had shrunk to a small point by now. However, he believed that his sister, Kazumi, was in there. Just like in Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, where Jojo and Dio could roughly sense each other's locations through their physical connection, Kazumi might not be able to sense him, but he had a rough sense of her whereabouts. She had detected him following her to school every day.
He could only roughly gauge her location, though. Just like now, the car had been right at the hotel entrance, and Kazuya could sense that his sister was nearby.
She might be in the room, in the vicinity, or in that car. He couldn't determine the exact location. But now, he clearly sensed that his sister was moving away from him.
She won't get away, sob, mom, mom.
Where is this? Kazumi was awakened by the sounds around her.
When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a dimly lit room. Around her were numerous boys and girls, just like herself. They were whispering and crying, speaking in Japanese, English, and some other languages she couldn't understand. Even though she could understand some of the languages, it was limited to words like dad, mom, papa, mama, and dad. Her brother had taught her these words. After all, they were planning to go on a trip, so even though she was still young, she had learned some basic phrases and terms.
She couldn't carry on a conversation, but this was enough to deduce some things.
She had been abducted. Surrounded by others who had also been kidnapped, she realized she had been caught up in a large-scale event. Oni-chan. Amidst the cries around her, Kazumi gritted her teeth. Tears welled up in her eyes, but when she tried to wipe them away, she realized her hands and feet were bound.
A closer look revealed that the others were bound in the same way.
Help me, Oni-chan. Kazumi lowered her head, her heart pounding with anxiety. She had a vague feeling.
Hey, who are you? The burly white man was slightly intrigued as he watched the approaching figure. Before him stood an Asian man, but his height was far from typical for Asians.
He looked almost 1.9 meters tall and robust, giving off a very imposing presence. In one hand, he held a phone, as if he were communicating with someone.
Is this the place? Kazuya said, I came here to find your boss.
What's going on? The man inquired. You don't need to know, Kazuya replied, punching him directly in the chest and then striking him hard on the back of his head with his elbow. In an instant, the man collapsed to the ground. Just get some rest for a while, Kazuya said. In his dreams, he had killed countless people with his fists, knives, and firearms, and he felt no psychological burden. After all, he had killed someone today, and the next night, he would see them alive and well again. He had knocked people unconscious countless times in his dreams, too. Every person he encountered in his dreams, he had rendered unconscious. Although he often failed at the beginning, either because he applied too little force and they didn't lose consciousness or because he applied too much force and caused external bleeding. His purpose was straightforward: to discern the details of their clothing and their physical condition. Given the current situation, he had indeed practiced for a while how to knock someone out. Dreams might be dreams, and you couldn't bring things back from them, but knowledge could be taken back. On the other hand, after confirming the location, he continued to talk to the police using the phone that hadn't been disconnected, then quietly entered the room after pushing the door open. I feel it. I can feel it getting closer. It seems like it's right here. The people here had very low vigilance, as evidenced by the man he had knocked out at the door. They were all just ordinary people. In this case, there were two possibilities. Either these people were indeed a ragtag group, or they simply didn't care whether someone barged in. He hoped it was the first option, because if it was the second... Bang, bang. What's going on outside? Nothing, I think. The man lit a cigarette. How much longer? About 3 more hours, Bauer said, checking the time. The ritual will begin in 3 hours. That's good then. We'll wait here for a few hours. But, I thought I heard something just now. What if it's the police? The police? The man sneered. Don't forget who we're working for. God's envoy. Even if those worthless people find this place, what can they do? God. Let's hope it's that way. Bauer fell silent after saying that. The time is approaching. A person with a masked face, shrouded entirely in a black robe, spoke. His face couldn't be seen. One could only make a rough guess about his age from his voice. He was likely around 50 or 60 years old. God's envoy. That's how they referred to him in this organization. In reality, he was well aware that it was not the case. He was not a God's envoy but a magus. Now, he had brought numerous children to this place in London, a small magical vein, which was the only place he could occupy. All the good magical veins within the vicinity of the Mage Association had already been taken. But that was okay, as long as this experiment succeeded this time. As the 6th-generation head of the Hubbard family, Garfield Hubbard, he was also the last descendant of the Hubbard lineage. From his ancestors up to him, their magecraft had never thrived. In his view, there were 2 simple reasons for this. Terrible magic circuits. Poorly designed magic crests. When it had been passed down to him, he had to rely on various tools to barely produce any magical effects. Without these tools, he would be no more than an ordinary person. However, after 3 generations of determination, starting from his grandfather's generation, they had been researching magecraft. By relying on incomplete magecraft research materials, he had joined a necromancer cult, even though he didn't know any necromantic magecraft. Then, with the resources of this cult, he had finally succeeded in developing his magecraft. By using the spiritual vein here, along with the 100 boys and girls, and his own peak magical power. By sacrificing all 100 boys and girls, using their life essence to transform his own body, he would gain more magic circuits and alter his magic crests. Especially the magic circuits. Typically, the number of them was predetermined at birth and couldn't be increased due to external factors. He would complete this magecraft and become an outstanding magus. The pupils behind his mask were slightly frantic. Inside, he felt fear and worry. But there was no choice because this was the first official experiment to apply this magecraft to humans. And he was using his own body as the test subject. After all, he had been a part of this organization for over 20 years. If there had been no results by now. Moreover, given his position in the organization, he had no right to request individuals with magic potential as test subjects. Even though his magecraft was so constructive, once it succeeded, it would make waves throughout the world. But, damn it, those guys don't believe I'll succeed. So no matter how much I apply, they won't provide me with resources. Now I'm just someone who doesn't care if it works or not. At best, I'm a peripheral member with a bit of freedom. You'll see, as long as this experiment succeeds, you'll all have to acknowledge me. With that in mind, he touched a certain tool on his right arm with his left hand. He could only find peace when holding this item. He lifted his shabby wand with his left hand. He hadn't set up any barriers here. Because this was London, and maybe it was safe without barriers. However, setting them up might attract the clock tower's attention. If he could, he would have left London to complete his experiment, Of course, that was only if it were possible. But in reality, he couldn't leave London. And his subordinates were all a bunch of misfits. The organization didn't provide him with any personnel. He had hypnotized these people one by one himself.
However, his magecraft was quite terrible. He could only hypnotize those with weak wills, or use his magecraft to impersonate a god's envoy, and beguile those with some cognitive deficiencies.
Honestly, the plan had been ongoing until now. He had gathered 100 boys and girls without any issues and hadn't been visited by the police. He was quite pleased with this. Previously, in order to prevent any issues with his subordinates, he had always waited until they brought the children back before secretly moving them. This way, he could avoid being followed by London's police.
For him, the threat level of London's police wasn't any lower than that of the magus because he couldn't evade or defend against bullets. "All right, bring the people up." Garfield Hubbard spoke to his subordinates. There were 6 guards at the door and 8 inside the room. These were all his subordinates.
Yes, God's envoy. The 8 people under his hypnotic influence showed crazy reverence on their faces, which Garfield greatly enjoyed. "No, don't. Save me, Dad." The next moment, Garfield, immersed in these emotions, frowned. "Hey, didn't I tell you to gag them?" Garfield said irritably.
Yes, we'll do it now. Never mind, hurry up." Garfield sighed. There was enough time, they could take it slow. "Hey, who are you?" Just then, another scream made his heart race. Bang, bang. He turned around to see that the 2 people guarding the door had already fallen to the ground. A man of East Asian descent, about 1.9 meters tall, walked in. "It looks like I arrived just in time. Who are you?" Garfield asked the newcomer. "Oni-chan," Kazumi exclaimed in surprise. "Are you okay, Kazumi?"
"Yes, I'm okay." "That's good." Kazuya relaxed a bit and frowned as he looked around the room. In addition to the children and the 2 he had knocked out earlier, there were 9 other individuals, someone in a black robe and a mask, who seemed to be the leader, and 8 others who were his subordinates. The police would likely arrive in about 10 minutes. The best course of action would have been to wait outside, but he couldn't be sure what was happening inside, and he had heard cries from within. So, he decided to enter. "So, you're the ones pursuing us," Garfield said, relieved. At least it wasn't the police or magus. "All right, you guys, get rid of him quickly. Don't disrupt the arrival of our gods." Garfield pretended to instruct. ..